Welcome, everybody, to Millennials Are Killing Capitalism Live. It's our eighth birthday, I guess, or anniversary. I'm not sure what we say in the podcast world, but it's pretty amazing. We've been doing this for 8 years. I'm very excited because we got Josh to join us for a live. So, Josh, good to be with you, comrade.
Yeah, likewise, likewise. Yeah, it's good to. I think this is my first one. Yeah, I think it's my first live. Technically, I'm sorry that it's coming under such strenuous circumstances, but being on the road. But yeah, I'm excited for this.
Yeah, so Josh is traveling, so that's why camera off this time. Good to see everybody in the chat. Mirza, Steven, Javier, Sarith, Cully, Mark, what a good Geo, VM. Thank you all. It's good to see you. So yeah, I mean, we used to do these fairly periodically, like we would
Hmm.
do
Hmm.
like, kinda like I don't know if we did a 50th episode, but I think we did a 100th one, and then, we would do, like, a yearly kind of, you know, wrap up or anniversary or, something like that, and, we haven't done it in I don't know. I was gonna look back. Maybe the 5th year might have been the last. I think maybe we did one that point, but it may have even been longer than that. It's been a while since we've done that, and part of it is that I'm bad at remembering the date.
Yeah.
Um, and part of it is just that like we're both very busy with a lot of different things, and
Hmm.
sometimes it doesn't. And also with like right now, I mean, with everything going on in the world, sometimes it just doesn't seem like the most important thing
Right.
to celebrate your podcast's birthday.
Yeah. Yeah. That's definitely a part of it. Yeah, I do think that we've been off of like just out of sync for the past year or two. Like just entirely different timelines. I'm me going back to school and finishing this book. And you killing it. Honestly, you've been fucking carrying us for the last couple of years. So I appreciate you dearly for that. And yeah, so I think it's just like a matter of just like being, disjointed in some ways. But yeah, we definitely should probably make it a habit more so than regardless of what is happening in the world. But yeah.
Yeah, no, I agree. And I mean, obviously, I mean, I don't, the carrying thing is one thing. I mean, we can talk about uh the different how the relationship each of us have to this podcast and how that
Mhm.
has evolved over time. And I mean, for me, it's like my full-time job and then some,
Mhm.
and
Mhm.
also my primary source of income as well,
Mhm.
and for you, I know I mean, since you started 8 years ago, you were in school and you've been in school that entire time, but it's obviously
Mhm.
accelerated. And then you've been working on the book, which maybe you could tease a little bit today. I'm sure folks will be
Right.
interested in hearing you talk about it a little bit.
Definitely.
Um, and so, yeah, there's a lot of different elements of all of that in terms of, um, you know, yeah, each of us, and but also we've been on different schedules, and sometimes, you're really busy with a lot of other things. And it's easy for me to do live streams when my kids are in school, but that's not necessarily a great
Yeah.
time for you to do them at, like,
Mhm.
8 o'clock or 9 o'clock in the morning your
Yeah,
time.
yeah, that's so it's funny. I was like talking about that with some friends recently because like like I said when I say we're disjointed, we literally are like in the mornings. That's like I write and I'm working like I because I do have a day job, so I'm either writing, researching, or working, it's doing stuff like early in the morning from like to like the mid afternoon, and so that's basically when you're doing most of your lives. Um, and then and so the episodes that I've been releasing, they've been like like they take forever to get out because we're like kind of I'm well, not we, but me. When I'm recording them, it's kind of like on the fly, and not nearly as like coordinated and like I don't know. It's been interesting though, how seeing how like it has evolved over the last couple of years. Because I remember when you first we talked about this before, um, when we first got when you first approached me about this 8 years ago now. I remember like I was an undergrad and an entirely different person, it's an entirely different space in my life. Um, and I remember like being like self-conscious about like the possibility of being able to carry the load, on my end. And it was much easier though back then than graduating and then going back to grad school, then dropping out of grad school, then going back to grad school 2 years ago. Um, and it's just been a much different, toll, I think. But it's been fascinating though. It's still the police, and I still enjoy it dearly as much as I've always have. I enjoy doing the readings, for example. And it's just like it's a the work is always rewarding, regardless. Wherever I am when it comes to it, I guess. But yeah,
Yeah, I often tell people when they send me book stuff that they should send it to
Mhm.
you because I think you're the one. Like my reading brain is like broken at this
Yeah,
point. I feel
yeah.
like almost, but not entirely. But I just have,
Mhm.
I don't know. It's harder. It's much harder for me these days to sit down and read a
Yeah.
book than it has ever been. Um, but
Mhm.
yeah, I mean, there's some interesting pieces there too because when you said it was easier in the beginning. I mean, it was easier in the beginning because we were doing like one episode a month,
Oh
or
yeah, that's true. Yeah.
maybe two,
Mhm.
at most. And also we were just kind of like reaching out to Twitter friends, like, hey, you want to come on and talk to us
Yeah.
about this thing
Yeah.
that you tweeted about,
Mhm.
and so I mean, I guess we should say for folks like to give backdrop for this, like where we were 8 years ago. And you brought up you being an undergrad. I mean, that's always a kind of funny story because like I didn't really know you, right? So I knew
Yeah.
you through your Twitter profile, and
Mhm.
and was like, thinking that I would need a co-host and would want a co-host for a project like this, and
Mhm.
liked your perspective on things and reached out and was like, would you do this with me? And yeah, I mean, I think I already had the first one kind of done because I think the first one was the interview I did with the young folks at HU Resist who were an undergrad then and now are
Yeah.
like adults with kids and stuff like that.
Mhm.
Um, and that at that time I had left DC. I was in DC briefly, and I was living in my mother-in-law's house
Mhm.
briefly to save up some money. And we had our second son was born in September. So, it was a funny conversation with my kid the other day because I was like, "Oh yeah, the podcast is turning 8," and he looks at me and he's like, "You've been doing it that long?" And I said, "Yeah." But I said it's also funny because it's like basically the same age that you are,
Mhm.
And so I have this human reminder, right, of how long
Right.
I've been doing this.
Right.
Um, but yeah, I mean, initially it was just kind of it grew out of multiple things for me of frustration, doing some activism stuff,
Mhm.
largely supporting like Jailhouse Lawyers Speak and Free Alabama movement to some extent, and some other organizations in that period of time, and how difficult it was to get stories, like get your work out, get your organizing out, your activism out in a space
Mhm.
that didn't like actively I didn't have this language for it at the time, right? But like it was like active counterinsurgency of what you were doing, right? So it's like you'd be trying to tell a story, right? And they'd be doing all this weird shit to your story to frame it, right, in a way that they thought that they might have said, well, this is how you do journalism, or this is how you appeal to a broad audience, or this is how you make the story, whatever justifications they have for it. um a big part of what it is like denying the actual story that the organizers or activists want to tell, right? Or
Mhm.
um and so that was really frustrating, and I had a friend, Felix Garcia, rest in peace, who passed away from like he had a freak. He was, exercising, his heart gave out. He had some kind of defect that I don't know if he knew about or not actually, but he died at like, gosh, I guess probably 34, 35 years old, right? And he and I had been, pretty close since high school. and he was a journalist. He wrote for The Independent. He had tried to do a podcast. He'd gotten in trouble from his job for doing a podcast and all this stuff. And when he passed, I kind of got interested in doing journalism, which was something that I had been interested in as a younger person, and um, hadn't pursued. I'd been in I mean, my actual career track is like horrible, really, but it was like largely driven by needing to make money and um looking for ways to do that and being at the organizations I was at the time. So basically I ended up moving from being like a tutor in an after school program to being in school administration and nonprofit administration. And then, and so I hated it, right? I was like super, especially as I got more and more like kind of repoliticized through the Black Lives Matter movement, which was a big part
Hmm.
of, I know both of our politicization
Right.
early on. Um, Hang on, something's going in my ear. I got something playing weirdly. Sorry, folks. Um, that you know, let's see. I was talking about Sorry about that. Black Lives Matter, and then what was the story I was telling? I'm totally lost my train of thought there. Um, It doesn't matter. I mean, Felix died, and I decided that I wanted to get more involved, and I wrote some articles. Actually, I did a episode of I Mix What I Like. One of the articles I wrote, Jared Ball liked and asked me to come on and talk about. So I did that. And then from there, I was like, we could start. I had the other thing that's important in the story is I had done production work and a little bit of guest hosting for Beyond Prisons podcast. So I had work with Kim and Brian Sonnenstein. Um, and doing that, I could see how you did it and what it took. And I was like, oh, I could do this. Right. And so, yeah, that's where I approached you. And we just started it off with like, kind of like, let's interview people we like on Twitter. And,
Yeah.
and then it really got into books at some point. And that I think is
Mhm.
where, it kind of took off actually initially was us starting to interview
I
authors
think so
and
too.
going from there.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, it does feel that way. And first of all, like, I think that's what I appreciate that aspect of it the most, um, because I think it's because first of all, a lot of times when I do like listen to, which I don't listen to many podcasts, believe it or not, and I'm not a big like video form or like even audio form like consumer of information. Um, like I
Quiet,
prefer to
Josh.
read.
You're gonna tell everybody to go watch movies instead of watching our podcast. But no, go ahead.
That is, yeah, yeah, that, but it's funny because I do think that like I've been trying to like diversify like how I do consume some information in terms of it, not just like reading constantly, especially now when I mostly read digitally. Like I barely ever read like physical books, um and which sucks, by the way. Like I love physical books and I wish I did read more of them, but it's just like much more convenient to read it from like my laptop or something like that. Um but I do think that it's something about like the way that I see people interview authors and like the kind of conversations that are had, and how sometimes it feels like it's just like so straightforward. Like, okay, what's your book about? And it's like, and so I think it's something, a lot of people can't read, not like literal can't read, like that we are in a, in a literacy crisis, of course. But I will say that I think a lot of people don't read, and so I try to like approach our conversations like with under the assumption that people are not going to read this, right? So I try to get weave as much information throughout the book as possible, and make it so that people, it really does feel like that you read the book after you listen to this episode. So and I think that's my favorite like form of like interview, even if sometimes even like articles sometimes as well. We just had Eker on recently, and he wrote a brilliant article, and we based that entire conversation based off of that article. Um, yeah, it's just a cool way to kind of approach the conversation, and I think it's also the easier way to to prepare for it as well. I think it's just much more convenient to have something to base the conversation on, other than just like having to scour up questions about anything and everything. But yeah, I don't know.
Yeah, absolutely. I should say to folks, make sure to like, share, subscribe, those basic podcast things. And we do have the Patreon and the Buy Me a Coffee links in the show description. We would love to, we're, we should talk a little bit about hopes and dreams for this thing, at some point, or what we would love for
Mhm.
it to further develop into. But, more than anything, that is contingent upon more support,
Right,
honestly.
right.
So anyway, shout out to everybody big shout out to all the patrons. Like, there's people who've been supporting us since basically day one or for years, and there's people who've come in more recently, and everywhere in between. And like, one thing that is very true is, like, we probably would have continued to do this even if it didn't become something that financially,
Definitely.
like,
Yeah,
helped most of us out.
definitely.
But I would not have been able to quit my job
Mhm,
in like, I think 2021, and really dedicate full time to it. And so the amount of work that we're able to do is very much related to the financial support piece. And
mhm.
I think, if we could get to a higher level, it wouldn't necessarily be that it all went to us, because I mean, we already have folks like, Aidan, who's helped out with producing a lot of episodes that you've done.
Mhm.
And we should shout out to Televangel. I don't shout out Ian enough because people are always complimenting the music and asking about it. And
Mhm.
I should say, I'll put his Bandcamp in the show description, and in the chat right now. But one thing to say about him is that
Great guy, by the way.
he's a really good guy. He's a leftist,
Mhm,
and he's also been a music producer that I've known since he was, I think, 14 or 15 years
mhm,
old. And I was much younger when I met him. Got to know him online initially. And he's produced for everybody from like Wu-Tang people to like um Dino Ferrar or De Niro Ferrar, like a lot of different artists, and even like some rock stuff. And a
mhm.
lot of his music is like electronica or electronic and like kind of down tempo, but also a lot of hip hop. And yeah, and he was for a long time the one half of the duo called Blue Sky Black Death. And I don't know if they're ever gonna kind of do reunion or come back together, but they produce a lot of great music together. And then he's done a lot of good stuff as a solo producer and artist, as well as like an instrumental artist. And so he from the very first, if people go back and listen, which I do not recommend, like, I always laugh when people say, "Oh, I'm starting from the beginning," and I'm like, "Well, you're gonna start from us in a like very liberal phase of our like
Yeah, it's yeah.
political development."
Mhm,
Um, but those very first episodes, I actually produced the music that was on them, which is, I mean, it's not good. It's just me like taking samples I like and putting drums to them or whatever.
mhm,
But the eventually I asked him, and I was willing to pay him something, and he was like, "No, I'll just do it on, the strength of it and what you guys are doing." And so both the intro outro you hear on the audio podcast, as well as the intro and outro you hear on the live streams, are all instrumentals that he created, and they were all created just for us. So people also ask, where can I like find this on, you know, Spotify or Tidal or something like that? And you can't. So um I think we probably should put them on Patreon. I think he's said before that we could do that, for folks to access. So we could do that. But yeah, very grateful to him, and people should check out like all of his other music, because he's a really talented musician.
mhm. Definitely.
Yeah, and he's not just samples either. Like he actually can play, you know, he's playing the stuff that is in it, which I mean, I don't mean I don't say that to diminish sampling production, which is the school that I came out of and love, and is a skill in its own right for sure. But he actually has a lot of people who sample music can't actually play instruments, and he can,
Right. Right.
So where should we go? What else do we want to say?
Well, I'm curious because you made a point about your about like politically how we were kind of underdeveloped when we first started this, and I'm curious if you can walk us through yours, like just generally speaking or broadly speaking, I should say, from then to now, and yeah, just talk about that for a bit.
Whew. Okay. I mean, I think so. My political arc, I've talked about in different ways. It's always something that I think is people will try to come to terms with because, and you've talked about this as well, but politicization is a process, right? It's not like something happens and like like, oh, I'm a communist now, and so I think that for me, like, there's a series of important events and parts of that. Um, the first one is my parents, who are both left leaning, and were always like quite critical of the US government, including critical of liberals, although they might, uh, you know, in many elections, they would be folks who would vote Democrat as a kind of lesser evil, sort of logic. But that never for them diminished their criticism and critiques of the Democratic Party. So like even if they had voted for somebody, they would still talk crap about like any policy position or thing that they were doing that they thought was bad. Part of that is my father particularly, and I say him because I think my mother shares this, but I think he influenced my mother quite a bit when they met because my mother came out of a Navy family and an Irish Catholic Navy family. And my father was, he had burned his draft card and then got drafted and then had to ask for another one so that then he could apply to be a conscientious objector to the state of New Jersey. And so he had this, he was granted that. And so he was opposed to the Vietnam War. Um, and, in order to get that, you have to kind of take a pacifist's line. But, even going back and reading some of the stuff my father said or did in in late 60s, early 70s, late 60s mainly, um, it was a little bit deeper than that. Like he definitely had an anti-imperial kind of, at least proto anti-imperial analysis. And still does, right? And so they were influences, but I think that they both leaned a little bit more, and it's always hard for me to tell because they're my parents. So like the way you talk to your kids is partly a reflection of you thinking about their safety, you thinking about not wanting them to do things that are bad or dangerous or can get them into trouble, right? And so they always were very much in the kind of like nonviolent um tradition. Martin Luther King would be somebody they would lift up a lot, like that kind of stuff. Um, but my father was very influenced by Kwame Ture, and actually, he with other folks co-authored a book called Institutional Racism in America in 69 or 70, and that was heavily influenced by then Stokely Carmichael talking about institutional racism and them saying, okay, well, like let's analyze this for white folks, kind of thing. Um, so like that, they're important political influences, and they also have been huge supporters of me and supporters of the podcast and all of that stuff. And that's I love them both. It's great that I feel honored to have them as parents. Um, and but when another event was reading Malcolm X's autobiography in high school, and me then going like, Dad, like nonviolence is bullshit, And I
That's
I really
incredible.
think I really think of that book as my this term, whatever, epistemic or epistemological break, right? Like that
Mhm.
book
Right.
was like the first shattering of kind of liberal imperialists worldview for me, right? Of you know, like all of the mythologies of what the United States is and tells itself it is, and white supremacy and all of that. Like it really broke that, and I think that for me, if there's like one moment that's a before and after, it is reading that book. Um, and so that took me down the trajectory of being interested in like the Panthers, like reading that kind of stuff and all that. But I did have this long period of what I would call like a kind of de-radicalization, right? Which I would put partly with college, which I just did undergrad, and then with working in nonprofit and also charter school spaces, which are profoundly neoliberal and profoundly de-radicalizing. Um, and unfortunately, a lot of that, because I worked at Harlem Children's Zone for 5 years. Unfortunately, a lot of that came through kind of de-radicalization that was largely um, a kind of marriage between Black nationalists and like Wall Street imperialism, you know, like quite honestly. Um, and so that, I was quite neoliberal, in the early, not like my impulse was still towards the radical stuff, right? But like it was sort of like, well, that's all dead. That's all over, right? Like we just have to work and do what we can, right? And you raise your kids and, you vote for Obama, right? And like all of that kind of crap. Um, and so it really was like then like Occupy, Black Lives Matter, to some extent. I know we both talked about this a lot, like the Bernie Sanders first campaign. Like, what does that mean? I mean, the
Mhm.
introduction of someone saying the word socialism and
Yeah.
people
Yeah.
not just like stoning him, right? Or something, like
Right.
was
Right.
was quite interesting in that moment,
Mhm.
right? And I think it did give a space for people to talk about socialism, right? And that, um not to say, I mean, I know you and I've also talked about all the ways it kind of misleads people into like what socialism actually is,
Mhm.
but at the very least, it also, I think, opened a space to talk
Yeah.
about it,
Definitely. Definitely.
and so that was to take us to the podcast, right? Like that was part of where we were in that time, was like we were like, well, we want to talk about socialism, but we don't want to talk about that kind.
Right. Right.
We
Mhm.
want to talk about the legacies of the Panthers, and then we got into Walter Rodney and like, all that kind of stuff. We also were both very turned off by the like white Bernie bro kind of sphere, but also like the way that was weaponized and the way that it diminished the fact that there were plenty of Black and brown histories of
Yeah.
anti-imperialism and socialism that
Mhm.
were not being given any space for discussion, even in like the left stuff that was going on at the time.
Mhm.
Um, and so then I guess I would say a lot of the rest is through the course of doing the podcast in terms of my
Right.
politicization, because I think,
Mhm.
having all those pieces, like you're sort of coming out of liberalism, we really, I think both were like, we're on a political journey right now, and it would be kind of fun to share that with everybody. Um, and so I think that's how I thought about the podcast a lot early on, and still do to a large extent. And it is. I mean, there's a ton of people in the chat right now. There's folks who have done reading groups with us. I'll go through
Mhm.
some of that stuff later, like all the reading groups we've done. Um, and yeah, there's just I mean, as far as my politics shifting since it, I would say I have gone from more of a radical liberal politic that opposed imperialism on maybe a more moral ground, um, to a more materialist, more influenced by third world socialists and Marxist and Leninist and Maoist traditions. Um, and I would also say, like, I was probably more deeply engaged with anarchistic folks earlier on. I have a
Mhm.
lot of good anarchist friends, and I know this is something that you and I have also talked about, and is a it's kind of an area of difference to some degree. I have a lot of good anarchist friends that do great work and have great critiques, and I bring a number of them on the show. Um, but I'm not an anarchist, right? And
Mhm.
and I think as I started the show, I think I was still in a place where I was kind of maybe not sure totally. Like I was like
Right.
very interested in socialism and Marxism and wanted to have conversations about all of that. But I probably was kind of, I mean, we were conscious of, like, we wanted to be anti-imperialist, but we and revolutionary, right? Which was kind of our dividing lines of saying we're not really that interested in the social democratic politics or critiques.
Right.
Um, but I think as time goes on and on, I'm less. There are a lot of people who call themselves anarchists and who have anarchistic politics who I am still quite interested in talking to and motivated by, and find a lot of value in their analysis and critiques. But I'm more clear on myself not actually sharing certain elements of those
Mhm.
politics, right? So I guess that's the best way I would describe the journey.
No,
How about
that,
you?
no, that makes complete sense. Um, and honestly, it was like I come from a super, I'm not super, but like a mostly apolitical family, right? And maybe not apolitical is maybe not the best way to put it. I feel like they're very disillusioned, but they have opinions. Like they have opinions on things, and they keep up like vaguely with things. But there was mostly a black Christian working class family, so um, I really was not like, you know, aware of things other than like just kind of vaguely, I guess, here and there. But I was also, my family like thought about things critically. So they were like, they had like critical opinions about things, and about whether it was like religion or politics, or whatever the case is. But it was like, it was never like really a coherent philosophy for them, really. And so it wasn't until I kind of got into my late teens where like I began to see things for myself. Um, and I think, funny enough, you mentioned you mentioned the autobiography of Malcolm X. One of my the first time I really like, first of all, it was Spike Lee's film. My freshman year in college. I mean, I'm sorry, my freshman year in high school. It was, I took this health class with my coach. I used to play basketball all throughout my life, and my coach, he was a white, old middle aged white guy, and he taught this course, and he was kind of racist, but he had a love for Malcolm X, right? Like he was like, it was the most bizarre thing that I've ever seen. But he showed me this, like the film in class one day. And for one, honestly, I'm not, and this is one of the things I'm really embarrassed about. My friends always give me a shit for it, but like I for one, I thought Denzel was Malcolm X for like the longest time. In terms of like, again, this, to be fair, like I knew Denzel was a person, and I knew Malcolm X was a person. Like I'm not saying like, but like in my brain, I remember doing a project on Malcolm X, and I looked up, Googled Malcolm X pictures. You know, you clip pictures from from Google, and like I used one of the photos from the movie, and it was obviously Denzel, and I used it for the project alongside actual pictures of Malcolm X. So just goes to show like just how kind of like things were kind of like, you're aware of it, but just it's just vague and kind of just like an, an abstract in some sense as well. It's like, because my family kind of like shielded me from a lot of that stuff. And honestly, in ways that, like, I kind of appreciate them. appreciate from them now these days. But yeah, so for the most part, it wasn't until I would say like the mid 2010s where like things began to become less abstract. I think where things became like, and it was definitely, it was Trayvon, obviously, who like my uncle, like I'm from Florida originally. Like I was born in the Hollywood, Miami, Florida area. Um, and my uncle is from Fort Lauderdale, and he lived like he knew Trayvon's family personally. Um, and so that was a really close. And I remember seeing my uncle, like, who was like this big tough guy. And I still remember like, yeah, it took him, like it hit him hard right back when I was a kid, a teenager at this time. I mean, I think me and Trayvon was the same age. I think he was maybe a year older than me or something, or I was a year older, it was something like that. But that was a big point of contention for me. Then Michael Brown happened around that time as well. That was, this big moment for me. And that's when I think things became like less of a far away abstract. Again, I experienced, like, I was aware of it, right? Like I was in the South, man. Like we're in a very like a somewhat diverse school, but it's also mostly white. But like, so like you have a bunch of black friends, but you also have a bunch of white friends. So you hear and see things, but like it's not as like coherent as like as an experience, because like it's just kind of like, again, an abstract. It's something like racism is something that you think happens in the past until like obviously you had these little moments. And funny enough, we had this big moment where like the Klan damn near came to our campus. That was a big point in like 2013 or something like that. Again, around the same time, things just started becoming less and less like abstract over time, just slowly but surely, around like the early mid 2010s for me. And yeah, I think Michael Brown was a big, obviously, like I said, a big one as well. And I think more and more, and then Bernie happened. And like honestly, the first time I wasn't really indoctrinated into like anti-communism much. Like I skipped a lot of school, so I may have just missed, the in high school when they were like doing that shit. But like it was not that hard for me to like get adapted to it. Like when I heard the word socialism and like I like looked it up, a little quick little Google definition, I was like, why the fuck would anyone be against this? Like this makes sense. Like this seems like obvious to me. So like in many ways, it was very very obvious, and honestly continues to be obvious. But and yeah, I think it's just over the course, just being curious. I've always been curious. I've always been critical. Also, sometimes at times in my life, been a contrarian as well, which has been bad, but also it's good in other ways as well. And trying to like just find out as much information as possible at all given times, and going to the source myself. Like I never take people's word for what they say. Not saying that you can't, but like I would just always have it in my mind, like, okay, go check that out for yourself as well. Like just like don't just like take someone's word for it. Especially when it comes to like something as simple as like reading, for like just reading an article or a book or something like that. Like that's very easy for me. And yeah, so I just kind of always had that, and I think the pod in many ways has helped me as a to read, honestly, to like read things critically, to read between the lines, um, and to constantly, trying to have like a way, a constant, being constantly curious, and wanting to know more. And I think over time, and we can talk about this a bit more later, but the last few years has been a constant like struggle of like antagonizing everything that you think because when you're younger, especially for myself, like you think you have it figured out, in a sense. Like you think, okay, communist revolution, boom, that's what we need. And it's like, it's true, yeah, that remains true, obviously. Like no one, like few of us in here would disagree with that. But it's like what gets underestimated is like, why hasn't it happened? And like trying to find like a diagnosis for that. Like I think a lot of us, we can diagnose the moment. We can have like these like incredibly sharp and to the point understandings of like the situation at hand. But like when it comes to like what comes after that, and what is required of us as individuals, but also as a collective, to like to escape these conditions that we have inherited from the previous generations. Almost like, I hate to say it this way, but I kind of contextualize this in the book, the name drop a little bit here, but like we have inherited the conditions of the previous generation's failure. And I really have struggled with actually articulating that, and in a way that remains humble, and grateful that like they did, it's no small feat to eradicate Jim Crow, Jim and Jane Crow. Like that's no like, it's no like that can't be minimized. But it's also like I've constantly been, asking that question over the years of like, okay, we're celebrating these movements, but like, why are we still fighting for the same things that they were? Like, why are we still like, and constantly trying to like, understand what that means for us, and how we can gotta get off the fucking hamster wheel ultimately. So I guess, and I think this is something I'm still struggling with. I think I'm struggling in the book, and I don't think I come to like a complete solution to it either. And I think that's something I've also had to accept, that like there are no easy answers for it as well. And I think honestly, what is going on in Occupy Palestine, for example, has been the greatest um, the greatest measure of like testing our humility, testing our like, oh, like everything we've done has been ineffective. Everything that we've been able trying to do, everything we've said, everything like, I often hear recently a lot of like people like calling for cause for like escalation. Is like, but also these attempts at escalation also has not halted the slaughter either. It's like, I'm not saying that there should be more, but of course there should be more, a little bit of everything, of course. But it's like, I'm really trying to practice that. I love trying to practice humility, trying to practice like trying to understand better how we can like truly and sustainably and permanently get ourselves out of this mess, in a way. And I think that like I found that I'm saying I'm not the, maybe I'm not the revolutionary that I thought I wanted to be as a kid, right? When I was 17, 18, 19 years old, when I was much more involved in terms of like day-to-day struggles, and locally speaking, I should say. And like, but I think there's another arm to it too, and I've I want to find other ways to contribute, to make sure that we leave things a little better off, than we found them, I guess, and whether that's intellectually or whatever the case is. But yeah, I hope that makes sense. But yeah.
Yeah, it does. It does. It was great to hear that from you. And I I do think that we you know, yeah, I mean this whole question of this is one of the areas I think there's slight, I don't want to say tension or disagreement, but maybe there's slight difference in emphasis between the two of us, but I think that we still largely agree around, right? Which is like
Mhm.
this notion of failure.
Mhm. Mhm.
um I mean, I think that I look to the movements of the past, right? And I say,
Mhm.
and I think the part that I get more frustrated with is that we can't even approach where they were in terms of the level of organization, commitment,
Not,
struggle, and so on,
not even
right?
remotely. Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah. And so like that's, to me, that's where the greatest humility comes in. But I do agree with you in terms of the effectiveness of the co-optation, counterinsurgency, and in that sense, ultimately, I guess, defeat of at least um the real freedom dreams and liberation, dreams of those generations, right? And
Mhm.
so it's
Mhm.
like you get like there are things that were achieved in that era that
Of course.
the dominant society did not want to
Oh, of
relinquish,
course. Absolutely.
right?
Absolutely. Mhm.
And I think that's kind of always in some way the way that struggle happens, right? Is that you probably aren't going to get what you want within your own generation, right? But
Mhm.
like if
Mhm.
you do it well, which I think we're very far right now from doing it well,
Yeah, yeah,
which is the
definitely.
humble part, right?
Mhm.
Um, but if you do it well, then like you can get things that then are
Right.
things that they don't want to get let go of. And I mean, if there's a failure, it's the failure in many ways of like Gen X and the millennials, to properly pick up those struggles, and maybe a failure uh uh to have to figure out how to have that transmission belt between generations, which that's one of the things that counterinsurgency really heavily tries to target is the intergenerational transmission of radical knowledge, right?
Right. Right.
And so, yeah, I agree with you on that end. We have a guest, so I'm gonna bring to the stage our first visitor. We'll have a few today. Sina, good to be with you, my friend. I do want to say about Sina that, and I know I've said this before, but I say it again. I mean, Sina's been on this journey almost as long as we have with millennials. I think you started like a year after us or so. But also that people a lot of times know Sina from the East as a podcast, and maybe now through Tankie Group Therapy and, you know, all these other collaborations that we're doing. But Sina's behind the scenes on a lot of things, you know, Red Nation, maybe soon to be Lara Sheehi's podcasts, you know, many others, Adnan Hussein show, many of these, and he could probably say some more. But also, like, he is the reason that I do video now. And so I blame him for that, but also thank him for that. Because
I lectured him for like an hour how he should pivot to video. What the hell are we doing? Why are we still doing this audio thing? And I was like, okay, you dive in first, I'll join you. And then I walked off the deck and I left. I said, I'm staying where I am, thanks. I'm fine here. Water's warm. I'm nice. Oh, it's very funny. Oh, it's very funny. It's good to see you guys. Happy birthday.
Thank you.
Happy birthday to your media baby. It's yeah, we both started our shows in October. I launched mine on Halloween for some reason. Like, I had no idea what I was doing. And then I like spent the next like 3 days neurotically checking my Libsyn stats, looking at like one download per hour and being like, yeah, I felt like a fighter jet pilot, like shooting down drones. It's like, yeah, 37, baby. Here we go. Straight to the moon. Oh, it was a different time. 2000, that was 18? I don't remember now. Yeah, I'm 1 year younger than you. My media baby is 1 year younger than me. And then Red Nation is 1 year younger than my show, because I met Nick about a year into my show. And then I was like, yo, bud, you want to start a show? He's like, okay. And then 6 years later, we're still here. Actually, I think we just celebrated our birthday. It was recently, maybe. Oh, I'm bad producer. Sorry. All my media children, I'm slowly disappointing them. Deadbeat dad, media dad that I am. Actually, but that's why we're here. We're celebrating your great project. So I'm happy to be here. I'm in a goofy mood. I spent all morning in my greenhouse, and it's like one of those situations where it's like too much of a good thing. Like, I dreamed about having this greenhouse, and then I went in there and it was like 42 degrees Celsius, and I'm like, what the hell do I do now? This worked too well. Like, how do I even manage this? I can't grow anything. So now I have this like huge problem on my hands of like, be careful what you wish for. So it's kind of like with media, maybe? I don't know. No, that's not a good analogy. I was trying to connect that. It's just a pointless story. Hello, chat.
Oh man, Sina, appreciated. Yeah, I can relate heavily. I used to obsess over Libsyn stats, you know, behind the scenes of like how many downloads, and then when you finally get like, you start to spike, right? And you're like, oh, like, you know, we've made it now, you know. Now I obsess over YouTube stats and look at my Libsyn ones occasionally, but yeah. Anyway,
I forget that my show exists sometimes. Like, because I went into more, because we took kind of different routes through all of this, is that you kind of focused on your show and kind of cultivated the community, which you did amazingly, and like your chat speaks to that. And actually Jay's, like your example, like MAKC's example is interesting, is that because if people who are like out there like watching this or listening to this after the fact, like, you don't need much to like sustain a media project. Like, you need, you need full-time time in a sense. You need like a sort of full-time labor. But in terms of like actual infrastructure, a podcast is not hard to build. The labor obviously is where it mostly comes in, but the equipment is there. Most everybody's podcast equipment has improved drastically. Actually, that's something interesting we could talk about. What you guys have over the last 7 years watching the kind of tech develop through all of this. From like, I used to use Zoom, and Zoom felt like the future when I was using it in like 2018. You couldn't make me use Zoom now with like a gun to my head, because it's the most like awful, unusable platform for anything.
Yeah.
It's actually amazing, but like I realized too is that we've like 7 years in internet media. That's a century, because like, so the time scales we're dealing with here is that, like, I was like, when was RSS even a thing? And then you're like, oh, Aaron Schwartz invented it. He was like not an adult for very long. Like, that's how old. And like more recently, he's like, I think they 2010 or something. I can't remember when. Something like that. But like, so somewhere in the 2000s, this thing called RSS was invented. And then it's interesting. It would be interesting, I guess maybe people know this, but like to think of the transition from RSS to becoming a podcast thing where you upload primarily audio files. I mean, people also upload video, obviously, onto RSS feeds, but the culture of podcasting, at least, is still, this of using RSS feeds. Going to your YouTube channel is a different story. Like, video is a different place. But in terms of strictly speaking of RSS, the technology of podcasts is like really straightforward. But we've also lived through this time where the nature of the consumption has changed, I would say, too. So that the apps have changed, what people are doing when they're consuming them, how people respond to the podcast has changed. Like, it's interesting, all this stuff. So I guess my question to you guys is, like, in terms of like the media history of your show, what's been the biggest shift, if you can, or one of them at least, for each of you? I'd be curious.
The biggest shift house, like say a
Just
little
like
bit more.
the most dramatic change in anything. So right now, like the thought of recording audio only, well, I guess for me, I still do audio only, I guess, if I do shows.
Yeah.
God, it's been so long. But I primarily think in terms of audio, but video for me is like an afterthought, which I guess is my own mistake, because like, for people who don't know, obviously the audience for video is so much bigger than an audience for audio. But Jay and I always have this debate too, is that like, what do you it's a different kinds of listenership. It's a different kind of engagement with consumption. Some people use YouTube as an audio app too in all of this. So you can't like, sometimes you can't distinguish views on YouTube with like a sitting viewer. A lot of people just have you on in the background. So like all this stuff like has gone through podcasting. So I guess I'm curious in terms of maybe what's a big change for you, or something that sticks out in your mind has been a distinct kind of transformation in all of this. For me, it would be video and clips. Like clips, the way clips are out now, and the machinery for like clip making. I don't know. That's probably the biggest.
Josh, I'll let you go first.
Oh no, I was just thinking, because I'm similar. I fucking like prefer like listening. And like even now, like I'm not. This is not a promo or advertisement, but like I've been using. I got like YouTube Premium, and like it's like even when I'm listening or when I'm watching, I'm listening. Like I'm not watching. Like it's just like I can't do it personally, which is weird. But like I prefer like to listen, and that's why I've been pouring so much energy into like trying to do the audio stuff, is because for one, Jay has the video stuff covered, of course, but also just in terms of like the prep stuff as well. Like I feel like it's so much more geared to what I like, and like having to like have all the information listed and be able to just like, it is always structured. The prep for it is different for me, and I appreciate that aspect of it. And I know Jay has like a different relationship to it as well, but yeah, it's been mostly like, even you mentioned how like you stopped using Zoom. Like I'm still on Zoom, and it sucks. By the way, it does.
Why?
It definitely sucks.
Why did you do that to yourself?
I'm not even sure. It's funny because I think that Jay, we started on like, what's that one website? It was like Conference something. It was like that first one. I think we started on those, and then we went to Zoom.
Zencaster we used to use at Red Nation.
Yeah. Yeah,
Yeah,
we
it,
used to
it
use
switched over to Zoom in 2020, and I just have not got off of that, unfortunately. Which because I really hate it, honestly, because I use it so much for work. So it's like I'm always on Zoom, unfortunately. But it's the most readily available, I guess. But yeah,
yeah, it's a so your Uber conference, I think, was what it was called,
Uber
or like it
conference.
might
Yeah,
have had
yeah,
a
yeah.
different
That's what it
name. So
was.
yeah, we used to do them as just conference calls, and actually, like some of the very first episodes are literally just me like having a record app on my phone and
Mhm.
having a phone call with somebody. Like it was that, like that's you can do it that low tech. I
Yeah.
do not recommend it, but like
Mhm.
that's kind of the space we were in 2017 initially. I think the first 2 episodes I recorded in my wife's childhood bedroom in my mother-in-law's house, like, as
Mhm.
my son, as my then like 9-year-old, now, well, I guess 8-year-old, now 16-year-old son was sleeping, right? And I'm sitting there like talking to freaking Geomar or somebody like that. So yeah, I mean that's one of them. Like the earliest one with Musa Springer um was the Walter Rodney one, and it was
Mhm.
recorded outside of like a family fun center, partly in
I
my
remember that. Yeah.
car during like a blizzard, and partly just outside, like literally like standing outside. So it like that's another reason not to necessarily go back to those episodes, is that the quality of what we were doing was like it was hideous compared to what we could do now. But very authentic. Um, so shifts. I mean, to me, the biggest shift uh was two. I mean, one was the pandemic itself. So like lockdown and people um like I had to work from home. A lot of people did. I was not a frontline worker. Um
Yes, you were.
and
We were the front lines of podcasting.
well, right, exactly. Yeah. So I really seized on that. Josh and I both seized on that kind of as an opportunity to dig in. And then, of course, like, that March is like kind of the lockdown phase. And it was also around that time I worked with Garrett Felber a little bit. They did a reading group with us and Robin D.G. Kelly. We read Solidarity is Not a Market Exchange, which is a piece Robin wrote. And he actually came through and talked to the group at the end of it. And then we recorded that and released it, right? And then I used it actually to kind of parlay to people. And this is an interesting thing, about podcasting, right? Is that part of it is like, I mean, I'm always surprised by how many people will say yes, right? But not that surprised anymore because we do have a big platform. But in the beginning, you don't, right? So, like, that's the kind of funny thing about it is in the beginning, you're like asking somebody to come on your show, but like, they're like, who the hell are you, man? Like, and
Yeah.
you also are nervous about that, or I was at least, of approaching certain people because I was like, who are we to ask this person onto our show? So Robin, we would use a lot. I would use a lot in emails to people like, hey, you should come on our show. Some of our other guests include like blah, 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 blah. Right. And so I, Fred Moten and Stefano Harney first come through in like around as you have like post George Floyd. I think that might have been our first conversation or second conversation after
Mhm.
George Floyd is killed. And um, they did a rehash of, kind of talking about the undercommons and thinking about it in that context and thinking about rebellion. And so that was a huge episode for us. It's still like I think number 2 all time on our audio downloads, um, and introduced us to a whole new audience, like expanded our audience a lot. And from there, I think that was really also the time at which Josh and we had started doing books, but we leaned much more heavily, and it was easier working from home. Like we read a lot more, we talked to a lot more authors, and we got much more regular with it of trying to put out an episode like every week to 7 days, I would say. So that was a big shift in our stuff. Technologically, obviously, the switch to streaming and to video is huge, and I think, like, to me, that I can't separate that from October 7th for me, because for me it was like
Oh,
after October 7th, we actually, with you, Sina, had a conversation right after that, like the day or so after that, with you and Francis. But that was like, oh, I don't want to be putting out conversations where I'm recording it and then releasing it a week later because I'm editing it or whatever else. And so that was really the thing of like, I want to be able to have conversations about what happened yesterday or today. And the only way to really do that is to stream. And so that was the big impulse to switching to stream, which was the other big piece. But I'm going to invite one of our friends that has been a big part of joining us in streaming.
Hi, folks.
And as you said, we met in person. We Twitter knew each other a little bit, but we met in person in the Robin D.G. Kelley study group initially.
Yep. That was a long time ago. Man, 8's a good number. You're past the 7 itch.
That's right.
And you're going strong. Thank you so much. I mean, you know how central this has been for my own thinking and just being able to ground and stay connected, and especially when I was in Doha too. So I'm just excited to be here and celebrate you all. And hey, Josh.
Hey.
And hi, Tina. Good.
hi.
Well, I mean, I mentioned this in the show description, but Lara, I mean, this is another. Sina talked about shifts, right? And I think, like, with the YouTube thing, and this is one of the things that you and I have talked about, is it does give a space for different types of conversations a little bit too. Where the podcast, Josh and I really still have, but had a format that we really developed, that we kind of almost all, there are some exceptions, but like 95% of our conversations in the audio sphere follow the same kind of flow, right? Which is that we've read something, or we're responding to an event, and we have a set of questions that we've prepared, and we usually send them to our guests ahead of time, and we they have time to look at it, prepare their responses, and we have that discussion. And sometimes we have follow-ups or things that happen organically, but a lot of our audio stuff is sort of predetermined in some sense, as we go into the space, by what we are doing and then what the guest has prepared. Whereas in this sphere on YouTube, a lot of what I've done, it's different with each person and based on what conversation and my relationship with them. But a lot is more like this to some extent, or more like the episodes that I have done specifically with you, which is that we're pretty much reacting in real time. Like, we might share with each other some texts, some preparation of things that we want to talk about, but we don't formulate that usually in the terms of like specific questions, specific answers. We just kind of, and I think that for the audience, that's a different experience too, because you're seeing two people. You can see both of them, so you see also how they're reacting. You can see when I've lost attention because I'm looking up something because you said something, or whatever else, or because I'm looking at the chat to see what they say. You can see all of that, but you also just have a space for, like, I think like, one of the things in the audio sphere that you don't get, right, is when somebody says something that I think is stupid, you can't see my expression on my face in the audio sphere. And usually I'm too polite to say, like, afterwards, hey, like, that thing that you said, I think that was dumb. But in the video sphere, like, people at least could see the expression on my face and read into what that might mean, right? Which I'm not talking about you, Lara, but like other folks that I've had on, they might see that. But but you also get like the emotion too, I think, a little bit through people's faces and how we, how we respond and reflect on the things that we're talking about a little bit deeper than you might just from voices. But yeah, so I really appreciate that. I mean, you reached out to me fairly early after shifting to video, and said, "Hey, like, would you be interested in doing a series of conversations and we can just kind of do this?" And I was like, "Yeah, that sounds great." And it has, you've been a real partner for me in this space too. So thank you for that.
Yeah. No, I mean, and part of it was we were in conversation, right? And we were just like touching base about how it felt to be taking in this immense amount of stimuli and trying to organize it in real time. And then folks were talking to me about very early on about how crazy making it felt. And so I think part of what you're saying is like there's a lot of trust that goes into this type of um style, I think. And I think you do it really well. And you all have created a platform. I know that's what I hear from everybody. I mean, I see the chats, I see folks shout out when I tune in. People are always saying this is there's something deeply moving and important about seeing comrades in real time work through shit. And I think that's part of it for me is that when we come online and, we have a general idea about what we're going to say, but really it's in relation, in struggle, making meaning out of the things we're seeing. And for me, it's been really important also to have a space in which affect is allowed, in which the fullness of affect is allowed. I mean, never mind my cursing. Maybe I have the I often have the what's it called? The high amount of curses on most podcasts. I heard that this weekend actually. But apart from that, just being able to sit and make meaning through emotions that are coming through and not having to be all tight in all of it. And I think um, having folks be able to tune in to the relationality, I don't think, I think that's a huge part of it. And I think that's what you've done in making these live conversations and certainly seeing the laughs, the eye rolls. I mean, the amount of time that I've rolled my eyes out of my head almost because some of the shit that we put online or some of the things we share, especially about Zionist ghouls and their ridiculousness. Um, just being able to to be together in this and then having forming a relationship also with other people on screen and certainly the crossover to Tankie Group Therapy and so I have this very special place in my heart and I'm forever grateful to you all for creating this and making sure that it's public facing. I think that's the big piece because so many of us feel alone. We've talked about this before, about these systems and this wear and tear and this constant struggle, making us feel like atomized subjects just alone and having to have the responsibility of individually processing all of this, which also makes us lose sight of the structural piece, like the analytic that we have to continue forward. I'll also say, just finally, and I see Renee's on too, is that the concept of like, I've really, through our conversations and through your generosity, I've really been able to think through and hone this concept of psychic militancy. I couldn't have done it without us being able to push through this and really challenging us to think about what is happening in real time and why do people get confused and why does it derail us and how do we lose sight of the structure even though we know what's going on and especially for those of us who are politically committed. Like it's one thing to bring in Sina's liberals right, that's easy, they're always fucking confused. But for those of us who are committed, how is it that we lose sight? And it's our conversations and our comradeship, I think, that really sets the tone for that. So I really appreciate it.
Well, thank you, Lara, and like, what a compliment that you feel like our conversations have contributed to, the forming of the psychic militancy, framework, which, I deeply appreciate and, look forward to seeing all the work that you're putting into laying that out. Renee and Stefano, good to see you both. Stefano, I'm going to go to you first because I don't know how your connection is or how much time you have. But I was saying a little bit ago that you and Fred coming on to do that, Undercommons Revisited episode was one of the big moments for the podcast in terms of like really helping it to grow and reach a new audience and connect with a lot of people. And I just wanted to thank you for that, man. And also, it was really cool getting to hang out with you and Fred a little bit at UCSB, I guess a year plus ago. And, I just appreciate both of you immensely for the work that you do and for who you are as people.
Well, it's been an honor to be connected with your show, and especially because, I followed some of the other guests who've been on over these last, 8 years, and wow, we've been in really great company. And I feel very grateful for the chance to be on your platform. A lot of people have told me about, seeing us there, and I just want a chance to come on and say thank you, and to tell you that the work you do is important. And you do a show over a few years, you do anything over a few years, you have a moment where you wonder, I'm sure you've had this, is it worth it? And is this something I want to continue with, and what's the price of it? But from where I'm sitting, it's been more than worth it. It's been invaluable what you're doing there. So I just want to come on and say that. And I am, I think my connection's okay. I'm here in
Yeah, it's
Brazil,
good.
in Aviña, and I'm just happy to be able to connect with you.
Yeah. Well, thank you, man. I appreciate that. And appreciate the other thing I should say is that we've also done study groups over the years on both the Undercommons and both All Incomplete. And one of the things that, you know, was a reflection from folks, maybe you could actually say something about this from your perspective, but when we did them, folks said, well, gosh, I never could have read this book by myself. Like there's this too complicated, a lot of the stuff that they're digging through. And one of the reflections in the study group was like, well, maybe that's the whole point of these books is that we have to come together and each of us bring, you know, what we know and so I don't know if that's intended or just a product of how you and Fred think and all of the things that you all are interested in. But they were great study group books to do because it really did take people who were, we have a person over here who's studying this and a person over here who's studying this and somebody here who knows a little bit about this and coming together that we could really dig into them deeply and have, I think, some idea of like, some of the things, a lot of things you guys are digging into in those books. And so that was a process that I really treasured as well, was reading those books with collectives. And that's probably been for me, I don't want to put a hierarchy on it, but it's certainly been one of the very most important and meaningful aspects of doing this platform is that's allowed me to connect with so many people and that those folks come together and we study stuff together. And so, in that sense, I also wanted to thank you for that piece.
Well, thank you, because it's a high honor for you to say that, given the kind of guests that you've had on this show over the years. I can understand why it could be hard to read by itself, because I can tell you it would be impossible to write by yourself. It's a book that could only happen between me and Fred, or between two people, or between 10 people, or 15. The work that we do begins as collective, and I'm happy to hear that it's received collectively. And, we have felt really lucky that everywhere we go, people say to us, we read this together. And at the same time, we say, well, that's cool because we wrote it together, and there's something special about that. And I see that Fred's on, so I don't know. Do you want to bring him in if you're ready, Fred, if you're there?
Yeah, I kind of lost track of time, but I must have heard you in my mind because here I am. So, hey, everybody. Hey, Jared.
Hey, Fred. Fred, it's great to be with you again. Yeah, I mean, aside from the conversation we did with you and Stefano, we also got the opportunity to put you and Hanif Abdulrakib together, which is one of the funny conversations because it's one of the ones where, in some ways, I was, I think Josh and I were basically an appendix to that conversation almost. Like, because once it started, you and Hanif had all these things that you could that you could go into with each other, and it was beautiful to watch that. And so I think we asked 2 questions or something like that, and you all just took it in a lot of different directions, and that was really fun. But also the conversation on Palestine that we had, Fred, right after October 7th in 2023 is one that people bring up a lot, as being, really meaningful to them to hear. And somebody just this week was referencing it and something I was, involved in. And so, just thank you both for your support of the podcast and your involvement with it. It's wonderful.
Thank you. I mean, it's like a staple now, for us and for a lot of other people too. So we're just very glad not only to be a little part of it, but also that you're able to keep it going, and it's great. So thank you, and Josh too. So,
Yeah. Well, much appreciated, man. Renee, let's bring you in. Thank you for joining us.
I just want to point out that you stay setting me up every time. You're like, Stefano might have a bad connect. That friend comes on. Why you do me like this? I don't even understand. Like, how does this happen?
Renee, you have to. You're too humble, right? Like you need to understand that people tune into Saturdays with Renee every week, and you have conversations with all kinds of folks, and people look to you, right? So like, don't be intimidated by Fred Moten
and I'm still shocked when I hear it. Like, I sent Lara an email, like, I was just so excited to like and Lara was like, wait, I watched you too. I never expect that answer, right? Like, I literally never expect that answer.
I was the one fangirling.
Which is like crazy to me, right? But I just, I'm on the road and I was listening, and, Jared and I've never actually had a chance to talk to Josh directly. So Josh, thanks to meet you. But Jared and I have like these random like text encounters, and then I'm like, call me, or like, can I call you? And I'm so honestly appreciative of like the work that you all have put in. And, I said it a long time ago when you all were, I think it was, you were about to hit like either 5,000 or 8,000. And I was like, how have you not like hit this market yet? Like, why? How is it even possible that you don't have more people paying attention to the work that you put in and the information that you provide? And it's vital. Like, what you do is vital. So I really appreciate that I can be in your circle. I like that I can text Jared and be like, let me ask you a question. because we need that, right? Like, we need people who might have like that extra whatever bit of information you need in the moment that you're searching for it. And so I appreciate the work. It's crazy that so many of us got started in October. I just looked we'll be at 2 years next week, which, like, head swinging, can't even imagine like how we got to 2 years and we're still going. But I mean, I appreciate being, Lara called it an ecosystem, and I think that was a great way to put it when we went on that one. So, you know, thank you. I just wanted to say congrats, because it's dope. It's dope.
Thank you, Renee. And yeah, I mean, I think that's one of the beautiful things is that I think that's an interesting thing about being on YouTube a little bit more than the podcast side, like the differences. And Sina, I know you got to go, but just kind of to the question you raised earlier too, is that, I mean, there are all these reasons not to be on YouTube, like fuck this company, like, I mean, all of that. But it does, I think, provide a space for some modeling of community and conversations with people, not necessarily in the format that we would hope for, right? But it's a little harder to do that, I think, in just an audio podcast space, and to have people be able to really kind of feel it in the same way, kind of connected also to what Lara said. And I think we've all needed a lot of that, I think, post October 7th, 2023, too, of when the world really just, the level of feeling like you're going crazy just went, as Lara was saying, like through the roof, you know? And so with that, that's amazing. Is that actually a house phone, or is that just a cell phone ring?
My son is calling to mess with me about something, but I'll call him back in a little bit. Sorry about that.
Is your ringtone an old school ring, or is that a literal phone that he called on?
No, that's just my ringtone.
Okay. There goes the joy.
Yeah. Well, we got a landline, but we're up in the woods now, so that the cell phone doesn't work too well sometimes. But yeah. Anyway, sorry about that.
No, not at all. That was amazing. So Sina, yeah, I know you got to roll, but I just wanted to thank you for coming through, man, and thank you for all of your support and collaboration and all of that over the years. Much appreciated, man.
No, thank you, Jay. Thank you, everyone in this call. Thank you to the community of people, Jay. Jay has been like it's weird. I had a few colleagues when I was in grad school. It's not true. I had lots of colleagues, but you're in you feel like you're not in competition, but you are a kind of solitary person on an academic job market. You like curate yourself and whatever, and you're like a whole thing. But when you're a podcaster, unless you're like a solo artist, and that's very hard to do, I feel. It's very hard to do, especially when you don't have a platform already. It's very hard to start with no platform and just be yourself and just talk to. So in the end, your job is to platform other people. And so when other people decide not to do your show, that's when it's over. So I always find it funny when Zionists or whatever threaten to end my show. I was like, what are you going to do? Stop me from having friends? If you shut down this show, I'll just start a new one and I'll call it East is a Podcast too. How will you stop me from talking? And so partly I think I'm like an evangelist for starting shows, in the sense of we need more nodes on this network. Is that we are in this incredibly hostile fascist media economy that is at war with us. Literally, we are the enemy of a paid class of people, a bigger enemy than actual fascists, because guess what? Liberals and fascists are best buds. And that's the system we fight against. It's a unified system. They work two wings of it, but it's ultimately they have the same set of bosses, they have the same priorities. And so we work outside the system, and we rely upon people who are listening, we rely upon our communities, the generosity. So I've admired the way that you've built your community. I wish I did a fraction of the things you do for my poor audience. My poor audience doesn't even get emails from me. Like, I went for milk like 5 years ago on my Patreon, and I like never came back. Like, I was like, forget this. Just be happy with what you get, buddy. Like, whereas with Jay, I'm a patron of your show. I see the like care and the community. Man, I'm not doing a good job selling my Patreon, am I? So I'm gonna start imitating you, Jay, and using you as a role model. Put it better. And I'm gonna do more of these like interactive stuff. I feel like I want to cultivate the East is a Podcast community, because I think ultimately a lot of my work goes to like the sort of network of shows that I produce, and I kind of spread it around, like whatever my energies and stuff. So I'm inspired by you guys to do more stuff. So I promise, you know, Papa's coming home, East is a Podcast listeners. It's been a while. I went for cigs. I'm coming back. You don't have to be orphans anymore. I'll send you an email on Patreon actually today. I promise. Don't hold me to that. But yeah, thanks everyone. It's nice meeting all of you. I know you from screens. And I guess I still know you from screens. But take care, chat. I'm going to end this. It won't be streamed to my channel anymore, but go switch to Jay's channel if you're watching this on mine. Bye, everyone.
Peace, Sina. Thank you for stopping by. Oh, man. So Fred and Stefano, so one of the things I've been asking some folks is because we usually ask the questions on our show, is if you all have a question that you would want to ask Josh or I about this or anything.
Well, it's not a question so much, but it's a comment. I've been really enjoying watching kind of, you know, off and on the going through those films with you and the guests who have been talking about the movies lately, and it makes me think of when I was in grad school. I started grad school in '85, so a lot of the films that y'all are talking about were, but I remember a big book that was kind of big for me in the late 80s, early 90s, I forget exactly when it came out. It was this book by Frederick Jameson called The Geopolitical Aesthetic. And he had this whole thesis about these sort of conspiracy films of the 1970s and the way that that within those films, there was a kind of aesthetics of totality, you know, that he was able to discern, you know, in those sort of, you know, like 3 Days of the Condor and stuff like that. And what I guess I've been realizing, particularly that last session with Orisanmi Burton on that Badge of the Assassin, was like, man, whatever inadvertent radical shit was slipped into, you know, those kind of films in the 70s, there was definitely pushback in the 80s, you know. And it, anyway, there's a lot more that one could blather about, but mostly, yeah, I just want to say thank you for being able to, you know, watch those movies, even though they're horrible, but it's still, it's like useful though, you know. So
appreciate it, man. Yeah, I mean, so the Imperial 80s. So yeah, I mean, shout out first of all to Mtume, my co-host there, for those episodes. And yeah, it's a fun project. It's kind of like trying to deprogram our childhood or something like that, you know, trying to like you know, think through the things that they put in our brains as we were, you know, kids growing up. And you know, hopefully through that it's fun for people, but it also is educational and thought-provoking and all of that. But and really also, you know, my father asked me the question. He said, well, don't you think they're still doing the same thing now? And I was like, well, yeah, but it might be easier for us to analyze it a little bit in hindsight, you know, if we go back a little bit, just so that we can contextualize the era a little bit and have some distance from it. But hopefully in doing that, it also helps people to analyze media that they're exposed to or indoctrinated into now. But yeah, the 3 days as a condor thing is really interesting. It actually came up in an audio conversation I had with Joe Emmersberger last week, and he mentioned that a lot of CIA guys actually really liked that film, because they thought it made them seem uh, evil, competent, but smart. Like it wasn't, and so they were like they didn't mind people thinking that they were evil. They just didn't want to be incompetent evil. And so I thought that was interesting, because I love those films in the 70s, right? And I even love like one of those movies I really like is the Will Smith movie in the 90s. What is it? I'm blanking on the name of it. Enemy of the
So
State.
the one with
Um,
Gene Hackman.
yeah,
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 yeah, yeah,
yeah.
yeah, yeah.
And I always have been drawn to those, and I feel like it's a little bit of my politicization is being able to watch films like that where, aspects of the security state or the deep state or whatever are, portrayed as, you know, going beyond the boundaries, trying to take control and, manage. And obviously there's truth to that. But I think that I think it's interesting to think about the fact that the CIA might like that portrayal of themselves, right? And like, what does that also mean about, um, maybe they think it's effective to recruit people to show the CIA as effective evil too. I don't know, or maybe it's effective in terms of also those of us on the left being afraid, right? Or being scared of the level of their competence or their ability to disrupt us. Um, but I also think you're right, which is that we also have to reckon with that there's been a big effort, and I think it really does take hold in the 80s and it continues to today, of this kind of long arc of, wanting to present the CIA, the FBI, the police, all of these forces in a very ultimately, positive, heroic, kind of light, even if there's, you know, maybe individual corruption or, missteps made along the way, right? That then just serve to show, well, but the system, fixed those things and is moving on and is moving forward. And, every system has its deformities or its dysfunctions, and we can address those and move on. But yeah, I think the 80s is really interesting that way, because I think you see a lot of media work being invested in to start to make people more effectively, I guess, to heroicize, I guess, is it, to develop the idea of people in all of the aspects of, the police state, I guess we could say, as heroic figures, and as necessary to empire, so yeah, I don't know. I mean, I think it's a very interesting question. It's something I think we're going to be continuously grappling with on that series, is those representations in the 80s. Yeah.
Well, I guess you and Josh have the excuse that you were kids in the 80s.
Josh wasn't even a kid in the 80s.
Yeah, I was born in mid
Fred
90s.
don't have that excuse. We don't have that excuse. And yeah, Josh, your excuse is even better. And but we did grow up in the 70s, and the 70s were interesting because, apropos what you're saying, there were, I used to sit down with my dad and watch like the Rockford Files, but we watched it all, Cannon, Barnaby Jones, Banachek, you name it. So this, as you know, or maybe some of the people listening don't know if they're lucky enough to be younger, these were all private detective shows in the 1970s, right? And a lot of them were sort of vaguely anti-state, vaguely anti-law, because usually the private detectives were running afoul of the police. Not saying they were anti-law, they weren't revolutionary, but they were interesting in the sense that they weren't an attempt to rehabilitate the official state, but rather a kind of moment in which these sort of oddball figures could make an appearance. Not all of them. If you think about Beretta, the machoism in Beretta was basically his kind of substitute for the state. But there were some of them, and Rockford Files is amongst them, where you had a feeling that there was, an attempt to plot some kind of course that wasn't state philiac. It wasn't in favor of the status quo in one way or another. And just the other, so there's all that stuff that we grew up on, which was happening at the same time as a lot of things in the broader culture in the 70s, which is obviously hugely different from what's happening by the time we get to the 80s. But I also say, from my own point of view, since I moved to Brazil, I've had these different timelines in my head. So in the 1980s, when Fred and I were in the university and when we were encountering these films and when we were dealing with the movements of that time, the anti-apartheid movement, the Central American movements, etc. This is a period in Brazil that was fascist. Not like how we talk about the US now, but actually, people disappearing, etc. So seeing this, having these different timelines in my experience now and how people react to these things, I think has also had an effect on. Uh-oh, I might have lost you there. An effect on the way. Yeah, sorry. I might have had an effect on the way that both me and Fred have perceived the contemporary experience for different reasons. But certainly, I think the two of us have had a kind of understanding of the Trump revival of America as exactly that, not as so much as a new and creeping fascism, but as a kind of something that we're historically and personally familiar with. And this is maybe a slightly different take than some of what we've heard around us. But certainly on your show, we've heard everything, and that's been amazing. So, this between the experience of the 1970s and some of my contemporary experience, I have some doubts that we should be rushing to think of what is happening right now as a fascist moment. Which is not to say that we shouldn't be sympathetic to those who feel victimized or are victimized. But I'm not sure as an analysis that it's that helpful to think of the current moment in that way. It feels much more like a kind of familiar return to business as usual in the U.S.
I kind of have a question for everyone, actually. If anyone wants to answer it, but on that point, because I'm thinking about I've been watching hundreds of films the last couple of years, and I'm trying to, for my own individual research, I guess, but but I've noticed two of my favorite decades of cinema have been the 70s and 80s, right? And so when I agree and understand that that there was obviously a presence of just explicitly counterinsurgent project or culture productions coming out of Hollywood, of course, but there also seemed to be a great depth of counter-hegemonic media as well, or just art generally speaking. But I'm thinking about, just to name a couple, like The Spook, Who Sat by the Door, which obviously was repressed heavily by the U.S. But I'm even thinking about Dog Day Afternoon and you got so many others, Punishment Park, and I'm even thinking about even like or internationalist films like Sans Soleil. I think it was pronounced. It's a French film, for example, or Come and See, which was very anti-imperialist, or and like, obviously like as much as there seem to be obviously how the state produces and reproduces itself culturally speaking, of course, there also seem to be more of a counter to it in one way or another, internationally speaking. But you compare that to now, right? Where I feel like it's somewhat like naturalized, where like there's nothing, like if you look on network TV, it feels like every fucking network has a cop show, or has a FBI, or you know what I'm saying, like some type of every show. And it was funny because I remember seeing a stat a couple years ago. I don't know if you guys watched Succession, but I remember Succession being like this big deal. A brilliant show, by the way, brilliant show. But it was a big deal for a lot of people around me. I remember seeing a stat about Succession versus like this cop show. I forget the name. I can forget the name at the moment, but I remember seeing the stats of like viewership, and like the cop show like had like it just blew the Succession out the way. You know what I'm saying? It was like most people in the middle of America is like watching this. Like there are like millions and millions of fucking people are watching these cop shows and these procedurals ultimately. So but it feels like there is though an absence of a truly counter hegemonic cultural productions being produced en masse, if that makes sense, where versus like the 20th century, where it felt much more constant, right? That like, yeah, of course the state is moving in a way that is moving, but like also there was, constant, dominant critiques happening to counter that as well, culturally speaking. And I don't know about now if that's the case anymore. And I could be wrong, but I try to keep up with a lot of this stuff. I watch a lot of films these days, and I try to keep up with what's being produced. And a lot of this shit feels like it's like, a lot of even the stuff that seems to be progressive or seems to be woke in one way or another, it's working in tandem for the state. I'm thinking about the Spike Lee's, not his recent stuff, but the one Black Klansman. I watched that recently. Like that's one of the most like truly counterinsurgent forms of media that I've ever seen before in my life. Like it's so explicitly awful in that way, and like the way that he presents the quote unquote Angela Davis's character in that film, where like she is quite frankly like hooking up with the cop, and it barely gets resolved in that way. And it's like and the way he presents Kwame Ture in that film as well is like as like this kind of like Black liberal nationalist, and in a sense it's like it's one of the most egregious forms of but that gets casted as like radical or progressive in a sense. And yeah, I'm curious. Ultimately, my question is, I'm curious if you guys have seen something similar where like seems to be more and more of an absence of, at least on the cultural space, lane, if that makes sense. But yeah.
Well, it's an interesting question, man. I feel like it's probably one of those kind of questions where quantitative methods might be appropriate, like, or at least some real straightforward kind of empirical, sort of data kind of stuff. Like when I think about music in the 60s, or people say, oh, well, music is so fucked up now. And the reason is because in the 60s there was a movement and there's no movement now. But back then we had, we had, Curtis Mayfield or whatever. And I'd love to go back to look at the R&B charts, and say October 1968 and see what was on there. And I imagine that the ratio of what we would kind of call silly, counterinsurgent shit to radical good shit I have a feeling it's about the same. It's just that, we have all these years of hindsight that have allowed us to really study Curtis Mayfield, and to pay attention to what's going on in that music. But he certainly seemed to think of himself as speaking against the prevailing winds at that moment. There's a kind of through line running through his lyrics, which is like, like I think of We're a Winner. He's like, if you'd only listen to what I have to say, he's constantly saying, will y'all please listen to me? You know, so I kind of feel like, you know, and then there's another element to it too, which is we might be able to look back now to some of the silliness and find radical elements within the silliness, you know. Like, man, I had a conversation, you know, both of you know, our kids, you know, Stefano's nephews, I guess he probably dropped out, but had to you know, went away to college this year. And I had this long conversation with our youngest child, you know, who's listening you know, for him, you know, he listens to a lot of different music, but he listens to a lot of stuff that I'm just like, why, you know? And we had this long conversation, and it was kind of, you know, and he listens to music where, like, somebody asked me yesterday what I thought about Kanye West, and I immediately started, and I just said, oh, well, Kanye West, I feel I'm sad. You know, he just makes me sad. If somebody asked me about Coltrane, I'll start talking about the music. Somebody asked me about Kanye West or Cardi B, I start talking about them.
Right.
You know, and I think maybe that's a difference, which is that there's a persona that seems to envelop and overshadow what people are actually doing. But and I get caught up in the persona, so I'm like, I don't want to hear you talking about Cardi B. But I sat and listened one day to Cardi B with my son, and I heard a whole bunch of stuff that I hadn't heard. You know what I'm saying? And so I guess what I'm saying is we'll learn how to read and how to listen to this stuff. And there's some things going on, and some of it's good and some of it's bad. But you know, as Curtis Mayfield said, we got to keep on pushing. I truly believe that the amount of resources that the people generate for what it is that we need to do, those resources are plenty. We just have to figure out how to find it and how to listen for it, how to pay attention to it, and how to join it. And that's important in the same way that it's important to look at what, you know, the bosses are doing and have some, you know, have an analytic, you know, sort of, you know, be able to analyze that. It's just that I truly think that what they're doing is simple. Doesn't mean that it doesn't require analysis, but it requires a different kind of analysis. But what we're doing, what the folks are doing, what the people are doing is complicated. And it's complicated moreover by the fact that so much of it has to be surreptitious. And so it takes more time. It just takes more time for us to pay attention to what we're doing than it is to pay attention to what they're doing to us, you know. And but we'll find it. But I had to laugh when you were talking about Spike Lee, because I haven't seen Black Klansman, but I know deep in my heart, Josh, that you were utterly correct. You know, like, I haven't seen it, but I know you're right. You know, because you're right. Funny. And because you're right, I don't have to see that shit. You know?
Right. No, I appreciate that, because I do think it's like Spike Lee is someone that I have conflicting feelings about. Right. I saw Malcolm X when I was 14 years old for the first time, and it blew my mind. But then I saw it again, you know, a couple months ago, and it's like I can, now that I know much more about Malcolm X, of course, and I've read much more about his life, it's like, oh, I can see how this is like, but I can also see the brilliance in it as well, right? But there's still brilliance to it, but it's still like, you know, it's but it really does. It's just sometimes to me, right? Like I don't mean to like ever like dismiss, because I know radical artists, right? Like I know that there are people doing brilliant work, and I know a lot of this stuff comes down to even like something as simple as like funding, like what gets funded, right? And what even gets to the point where like it makes it off the, you know, the notebook, the notes ultimately. So, but it really, I really do. It feels like it's in a sense that like there's something of like, I don't even think about in the point about Kanye West is a great one, I think, or even Cardi B. Like I think, you know, mainstream hip hop's greatest export today is like self-annihilation, even like that. Like I think they're truly producing counterinsurgency. Like I think that is like that's the primary, you know, function of mainstream hip hop today. And again, but again, there's some brilliant underground, you know what I'm saying, hip hop artists who are doing some brilliant work, and they're making pennies, and they're starving artists. You know what I'm saying? And it's like, and they can't make money off of this. They can't, you know what I'm saying, survive off of the music ultimately. So, and I know that's the trade-off ultimately. But it just feel like, you know, somebody even in terms of like the more popular artists, something like the Kubricks and the, you know, and folks like that who were like, they had something to say, you know, they had something, they were like able to apply, I guess, and compared to like the artists of today, the more mainstream popular artists of today, if we're talking about popular culture ultimately. So, you know, which is what the masses are consuming. That's what
Actually,
they, you know.
Part of what your question made me think, Josh, and then Fred's answer was that this, you know, this show and what you all are doing, for me, feels like a project, a continuous project of disrupting identifications. Like I'm speaking psychoanalytically, of course, but also affectively. And if we're thinking about counterinsurgencies and how they work to lodge themselves inside of us, they work through identifications and identifications that sort of build internal infrastructures that get mobilized very quickly. Like you don't have to do much, right? So Fred sort of talking about like, okay, somebody says Kanye and you start talking about him, the persona. Well, that shift, what does that happen? And I feel like what you all have been doing, and maybe this is what I was thinking about these public facing conversations, is what does it mean to constantly press and put pressure on the identifications, the ideological identifications that are meant to hide seamlessly for all of us. And this analytic, whether it's through the Imperial 80s or these conversations or through questions that might seem to all of us so basic, like a lot of people are like, why do I even have to repeat this? Well, part of why we repeat it is because there's an entire industry, ideological industry that is meant to shore up and stabilize these identifications. And so, but your project for me, for the show, goes further too, because it's one thing about disrupting identifications. Okay, we repeat that. But part of, I think, the most powerful thing for me through these conversations, through, Jay, what you were saying, like putting yourselves out there and your guests putting yourselves out there to kind of undo and de-link some of the things that you grew up with, is also forging like revolutionary counter-identifications, which that's, I think, part of what we might feel is missing or doesn't have. And this is what Renee was saying about the ecosystem, is like, what does it mean to also have a project of counter-identifications, revolutionary counter-identifications? And that doesn't have to be neat or fixed or done for. To the contrary, it's like what emerges. Like the Imperial 80s came about through the process of your show and this relationship building, and then saying, okay, there's something I want to do in real time with somebody else. And I think that's the other piece for me, is that this project of identifications, disrupting identifications, and then forging revolutionary counter-identifications is also a relational project. It's a collective, like Stefano was saying this earlier, like how do you do this together? Because the process of doing that alone, it's really hard to also come upon some of this stuff. Like, Jay, some of the more powerful conversations you and I have had are like when we fall upon shit that we thought we've excavated and been done with, right? Whether that's through the myth making of empire or any one of these things, or carceral logics within ourselves, or disciplining functions of each other, of other comrades, whatever the case is, it's a rigorous, this shit's rigorous. And it has to be constant, and it has to be disciplined, and it has to be explicitly political. And I think that that's what you're like. I'm just putting it together as I listen to everyone. I'm like, okay, this is the through line. Like this is the project here. Whatever subject you all are taking up, I feel like you're doing that political project for us, and I'm just super appreciative.
I appreciate that. Yeah.
Yeah. Thank you, Lara. I mean, like the latest thing I do is always on my mind, right? So like the last couple of days I've been watching A Nightmare on Elm Street because we're gonna do that with Renee on Monday on Imperial 80s. And it's like a really interesting film actually to do this type of work on. And I think as we're gonna do horror for the whole month of October, and I think it'd be interesting to do because it's like there's actually interesting social commentary and critique within horror that often doesn't show up in other forms of cinema. But there's also these kind of acts of like, I guess it's part of the genre and how it operates, right? And the kind of storytelling that you do, that you sort of personify whatever the critique is into like, one individual, and then maybe it's like the behavior of the teenagers who are being you know attacked by this thing. And I mean, it's interesting because I think I've heard people say this too, that it's frustrating. I think Jared Ball said this actually last week, that it's frustrating to some folks that the only films they feel like are coming out now on a kind of mainstream, Hollywood level that have some kind of social commentary and critique are horror films. Like that seems to be a space where people have found there's been a lot of black horror films. Like people were talking about the film Him, which I haven't seen yet, but
Bad.
but the point being that this is a space where people are trying to do some form of social commentary and critique, which is very limited, I think, within a lot of the stuff we get, at least in the biggest platforms. So like you can look at Freddy Krueger, and I listened to Wes Craven talk about who he is and his own journey and like what he's representing or thinking about with Freddy Krueger. And like, the image of him comes from some guy he was afraid of as a kid, basically, that, and combined with kind of homeless aesthetic and aesthetic's probably not the right word, but homeless representation. And I mean, there's interesting stuff in what Wes Craven thinks about it, but then I'm also like, so another thing on my mind is people saying recently to me that they can't watch horror right now in this moment because the world is so horrible, right? The world is like that it seemed like that Freddy Krueger is not scary, compared to like what they're dealing with on a day-to-day basis, or what they see when they turn on their phone, right, and see what's going on in Gaza or Yemen or Lebanon or Congo or whatever. And yeah, I agree with that, but it is interesting in terms of thinking about horror films and thinking about, well, like what happens if you just tell people like Freddy Krueger is capitalism, like he's yeah, like that's what that shit is, right? These are the evil things that are coming out. The real terror is what's produced by our system, and these films now, like New Line Cinema is not going to do that, right? They're not going to say that. But again, it comes to us coming together. And I do think that's something that we miss sometimes. I guess it's kind of to thread the points you were making with Josh with the ones you were making, Fred, as well as you, Lara, is to say, like, I do think sometimes when we get too invested in just the product of critique, we forget about like what we could do when we get together with our friends and look at a film and say, hey, like, what if we just we put our own spin on this, or our own narrative on this, or we develop some kind of messaging that we want to get across out of this thing. And I feel like that's something that was also more prevalent before the internet, honestly. Like, we might do it on here now, but that's something that I miss, or I feel a loss of, which is maybe also part of my interest in going back to the 80s, because that was a time when I would get together with my friends in person and we would talk about stuff, and so yeah, I don't know, but it's an interesting, I don't know where I went with that, but I went somewhere.
Oh, I love that you're just like, this is capitalism. So fun fact about Freddie Crew. I'm so excited for this conversation because, and here I'm going to give a shout out to immigrant parents who have no fucking idea what their parents are, what their kids are doing, or what they're watching or whatever. And I watched Nightmare on Elm Street for the first time. I was 5 years old because there were people visiting, and an older, extended relative put it on and probably was a little sadistic in making us kids sort of watch it. And it sticks with me because one of the things I realized very early on, and then later on, of course, you go and rewatch it and you realize, why is this so terrifying psychically, is that he comes in your sleep. There's no escaping that shit, right? Like that lockdown psychically on, like, you think you could run away, you think you could do shit, but like no one can defy sleep. And I just remember over and over and over again seeing these characters sort of try to fight sleep in all these different ways. And like the thing that's which is why the capitalism thing really actually sticks with me, is like all the ways in which it infiltrates, and you're like always in the system. You have to disrupt it in some ways. The second thing about it that was really interesting to me, I don't know in what part of the franchise you have this like first rehabilitation story of the sociopathy that's involved, and you see that he's sort of abused, right? And that, I think, also is sort of seeing what characters get rehabilitated and what don't, and how that's part of the project. And so there's just so much there. But I am one of these people that just can't watch horror anymore. And at one point, I think, subjected myself to that through mastery because of the 5-year-old story I'm telling you about. And then just sort of like, this shit is just like too real. And you don't, there's this type of cruelty that exists in real life and is produced and exacted on certain people, and certain people can escape it and others can't. And so it just feels like the pervasiveness of that and how deep it goes. Like, it's just so psychically disturbing. So I'm grateful that you all are taking this on. So maybe I can dig up another layer of my psychic mastery of Nightmare on Elm Street.
Yeah, and we're gonna traumatize you by making you watch Delta Force with us in November. So, look forward to that. Fred, what do you want to do with us? You want to do an Imperial 80s?
I don't know. I don't even. I can't think of what was. I don't have any movie that comes to mind really. When I think about the 80s, but if you give me an assignment, I'll work on it though. So,
all right, we'll send you some stuff.
Okay.
All right, man. Well, Lara and Fred, we're gonna start to wind down. I think we're gonna take the last couple minutes to sort of do some reflecting and some thank yous and stuff like that. So, anyways, I just want to thank you both for coming through and chatting with us, and sharing this celebration with us. But also just both of you for all of the support that you've given us over the years. It means a whole lot, and is a big part of why. Yeah, I mean, Stefano asked the question of like, thinking about, stopping or that kind of stuff. And that's creeped in a few times, but it doesn't usually stay for very long. And I think it's because of folks like you, as well as like just all of the people that support the podcast and are involved in some way or another. So, yeah, thank you both.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks for inviting us.
Yeah, cool.
Absolutely.
Congrats.
Okay.
Thank you.
Yeah.
All right.
Thank you. All right, Josh. So I do want to kind of wind down. Was there any other topic or any other specific thing you wanted to get to? Because I can pull up, there's some stuff from the audience. And audience, you could drop a question in there if you want, or two. And then I do want to just spend a little time on like shout outs and thanking some people too.
No, nothing really, other than like thinking about the near future, or like maybe even like distant future. Like what do you imagine for this developing into? Because I've thought about that quite a bit over the last
Mhm.
year or two when I've been trying to race to finish this book and stuff, and like what I want to do after that. Um, and yes, I'm curious about what you're thinking. I'll tell you what I'm thinking when I'm done. Well, when you're done.
Yeah, well, first so let's do that, because that's a good question. But somebody asked, and I can't find it, but I know somebody asked this, and I think I'm sure folks would want to hear. Can you give folks a brief synopsis of your book and what you've been working on and writing about?
Okay, so the book is I'm publishing it with Pluto Press, and it's honest. It was supposed to technically come out last year, but we pushed it back for numerous reasons. For one, me and my editor are he's based in London at the moment. We on different timelines, so like but some other stuff, bunch of stuff has happened since then. I was like, okay, I'm gonna update this. Although he's definitely giving me the grace and time to finish this book. But what I would say is that it is somewhat of a schematic genealogy of history in the U.S., particularly Black folks' history in the U.S. And I'm thinking about this very specific ways that the state has responded to Black struggles, and the ways that the state has sedated and halted or delayed even the long Black liberation struggle, which I think of as ultimately inevitably a revolutionary struggle ultimately. So, and it takes places in stages, of course. So we have obviously most importantly the slave revolts and things like that. And then I'm thinking about obviously the Civil War, which Du Bois, for example, reframes or recasts as a Black workers struggle ultimately. So I'm thinking about that. I'm thinking about obviously Reconstruction era, and I'm thinking about the Civil Rights and Black Power era as well. And I'm obviously thinking most importantly about now, I would say. And I'm thinking about specifically the way that the struggle has been delayed constantly, and how the state itself has made it an impossibility, for a true equitable society to be born under the current conditions of things. And I try to lay that out, and I don't, go into depth with every single like point of history, but I do try to like synthesize it in a sense and give like brief summaries for how I understand these different periods of time and their impact on both the Black cultural and political and economic, and obviously maybe most importantly the psychological turmoil it has taken under for Black folks in particular. Yes, I'm just thinking a lot about counterinsurgency. I'm thinking a lot about the revolutionary struggle and the many ways that it has stopped and started and stopped and started and been killed. And I'm thinking about defeat and taming and how these things all have kind of culminated in this moment now that we have inherited. Again, like I said earlier, we've inherited this moment that is just deeply egregious in many ways, and we're trying to find a way out. A lot of people are trying to find a way out, and I'm trying to like somehow find an answer to not just the way out, but like how we even got to this point to begin with, ultimately. So, which I think has been a culmination of just like, the state's ability to be able to zap, all radical and revolutionary history, particularly Black history. Yeah, I don't know. And I just think that we have an unresolved issue, and until we resolve it, then basically it's gonna remain how it is today. So I try to put that in 200 pages or so. But yeah, that should be out early mid next year. It should be out for sure. Because I'm putting finishing dots on it right now. But yeah.
Yeah, well, I look forward to it. Look forward to talking to you about it. Yeah, can't wait. And I remember, I mean, you described it, and it sounds so ambitious. And I remember that was one of the things that when I talked to Dylan Rodriguez, I think was one of the reviewers of the manuscript or something like that. He had seen an early form of it, and he said, "This is a very ambitious project."
Yeah.
So yeah, it is for sure. So I can't wait to read it. But I also know, I mean, you talked about reading before, and I'm significantly older than you, but I bet that in your life you have, and I read a lot. I've read a lot of books, but I bet you've already read more books than I have in my entire life. You are a voracious, reader, and So I look forward to also seeing all of the different threads that you work through all of the
Yeah,
stuff
yeah.
that you've studied and thought about and thought with for all these years. So
Mhm. Yeah, I'm excited
it's gonna
for it.
be
I'm excited to talk about it on here too, for sure, at length.
yeah,
But yeah, definitely.
for sure. Shout outs. I want to first of all thank you, Dr. Susan Jacob, for becoming a member of the channel. Francis, thank you for the anniversary or birthday gift. Appreciated. And folks, yeah, again, like you can support through Patreon, you could support through Buy Me a Coffee, or you could support through YouTube. Much appreciated. Any support you can give. All right, before we do audience questions, then so like the future. So from my end, what I would love to do is to really build a larger media organization.
Mhm.
And I think that the question is like, what does that look like, and how do you do it, and how do you build it in such a way where nothing is you can't make something that can't be repressed, within our society for sure. But how do you build in kind of resilience, right, to the system so that when they attack you one way, that you have some kind of response. And obviously one response is what Sina said, which is like you just make the same thing and call it something else. But I think that um beyond that, thinking about different frameworks of it, should it be an association, should it be a coalition, should it be and there's other examples of this out there, which every time one drops, I'm a mixture of like really excited that people are doing it and a little bit pissed off because I'm like, why didn't they ask me? Or more than that, like, damn it, they beat us to it, right? But
Right, right, right.
but on the flip side, those are like petty personal emotions. That's not actually my political response, which is that it's great, right? Like I want everybody to be working
Absolutely.
together in a more organized fashion, and we need more and more stuff like Sina's saying, because ultimately this sphere or this group of media projects, it might seem like everybody on the left is a podcaster and not enough people are in an organization or some version of that
Right.
dichotomy, right?
Hmm.
But when we see how powerful the media networks are of, for instance, like the far right in this country, like we have a
Right.
lot of work to get to the place where even on a level of getting our message to people, that we have more and more powerful ways to do that and more people involved in that. So
Hmm.
I actually think that's a really important thing, and I think it is actually a form of organization. And I think that a lot of the people who do media work are also involved in organizations, right? So it's not this like dichotomy of just, oh, somebody's a podcaster and they don't do anything else or whatever that I think sometimes people imagine. But um as far as that, I mean, on my mind are a lot of the folks that we already work with, right? A lot of the folks, especially on the YouTube side, that I've collaborated with in the last couple of years. A lot of people that we do these crossover conversations with, folks like those that were on this live today, and many others, is how do we develop some kind of even infrastructure that can help to more sustainably fund the work that all of us do, right? Um and and improve the quality of it too, right?
Hmm.
So that's the
Hmm.
other part, is that aesthetically a lot of times what we do is not as good as some. I don't know if people saw this, but I'll just use this as an example. Alex Aviña, shout out to Alex, one of the people I wanted to shout out today, but he recently did a piece for Wired magazine that they put on their YouTube video. And last I checked, it was at like 170,000 views. And on one level, it's because Alex is brilliant, but also like Alex has been brilliant for a long time, and he's been on this show, he's been on Gorilla History, he's been on East as a Podcast, all of these things. and people love him on Twitter. He's brilliant in all those spaces. He is who he is. But the platform was big, and the production quality, editing, work that went into it. It's like a 30-minute video, but everybody who listens to it and watches it is like, wow, this is great, and it's great for what it is, right? Because it's something, obviously it's going on a bigger platform, it's addressing more of a mainstream audience, but still, embedded within it is these radical critiques and Latin American history. Like, that's the topic of it, which is obviously his specialty. But all that to say, like, I don't think that the conversation that he had is necessarily better than conversations that he's had with us or with others, right? It's that it's all of the other things. It's the packaging, it's the production, it's the editing, it's everything. And to get there, it just is it's a matter of resources, and not like I'm not talking about like an insane amount of resources, right? But it is a matter of having the investment to be able to pay, lighting folks, like hair and makeup folks, somebody knows how to like make a movie, produce it, right? And a lot of these people are within our network. Like Mtume is a director, right? Like, he could do a lot of these things. Like, I know people, people, or do photography and cinematography. Like, we all know these folks, but it's one thing to just sort of ask people to do a favor for you at one time, which we can do here and there. But it would be nice to be able to pay people to do better quality stuff as well. And so those are areas where my mind is like, how do you develop more like a network? A network is probably a good word, not in the sense that we think about as like NBC, right? But like a network of of people. And and have those resources that you can then support multiple people who are doing the kind of work we are as individual creatives, for lack of a better term, right? And yeah, so that's part of it. I mean, that's part of what I would like to see. But yeah, again, and maybe we'll do more targeted appeals and like build that out. And I mean, it's part of it is the political work to get people to agree to be a part of it, and then collectively envision like, how does it work, and what happens when you really disagree about your line about when such and such happens in the world, and that's a problem, right? Is that like we don't all agree on everything, but that's okay. But how do you deal with those things, and how do you deal with everything else that comes with it? And so, I mean, Black Liberation Media is a good example, I think, of that kind of idea, but they need more resources too, right? So it's like it's being able to support different folks. Yeah.
Yeah.
So
first
for
of all,
you,
I think for one, I want to, before I touch on that, Mark asked a question that I thought about it quite a bit as well. Just like the question of just like the inevitable repression from these, like, and I think that speaks to what you're talking about, right? That like the kind of like become sustainable enough, without having to solely rely on these major platforms, and knowing that they can simply kill you. It's ultimately so, right? It's something I think about quite often. But yes, but I totally agree with you, and I totally imagine the very same thing. But I will say on like a more like on a less of a on a more minor level, which is not really minor because it's pretty like ambitious as well. But I thought about I don't know if anyone in the chat has seen. There's a couple films like this, but there's one from 1948 called Strange Victory, and then there's another one called Sans Soleil, by Chris Marker. It's a French film from 1983, and they're both like documentary essays almost. And I would love. I actually done this with Aidan and a couple other folks as well. Like I have quite a handful of like filmmaker, documentary type friends who are really into that stuff. I really, really, really want to write those type of like documentary essays or like just like video essays, and with like accompanying like archival footage in the background, or like just having like these like yeah. I would love to like get to a place where like that. I think that's gonna be my next thing that I'm gonna focus on when the book is finished. To be honest with you, just like I've already started taking notes for it and trying to jot down ideas in here and there. But I think that like trying to do more almost like archival or historical like research for the public almost, because like it's a, I don't know how familiar people are with like university archives, but like there's so much. I attend a private university in Chicago, and there's so much like if you go to these libraries, you go to these archival stuff, like they are quite literally imprisoning, a lot of like footage and histories and the different like papers that great revolutionaries or radical figures have written and things like that and participated in. And a lot of it is just like it never sees the light of day outside of like if a person studies that stuff like me, like a freak who studies that stuff, right? But it's like we have to find a way to extract that from the university and give it to the fucking public ultimately. And I want to find more ways to do that creatively in a way that people I think connect with. And I would love to like, along with doing like interview style or conversational style, like conversations for the pod, doing more, explicit, or I guess other ways of delivering historical information, if that makes sense. But, and it's funny, not to shout out technically someone who may be our competition, quote unquote, if you can call it such a thing. But I really fuck with them. Blowback. I don't know if you guys are familiar with Blowback. They're doing some cool ass shit, and I love what they're doing with the podcast stuff. It's like, but they have. I just listened to the one they did on the Iraq War, for example, for the first time a couple months back, and they're doing one now about like Cuba and Cuba sending soldiers to like the African liberation struggles in the 20th century, and just like basically it's like documentary but like audio documentary stuff. Like it's something about that plot like that, but it's very like I can't even explain it because it's not just talking. There's a lot of like there's a lot of like borrowing from archival materials and inserting in like interviews, things like that from like from the 60s and things like that. It's a really cool like way to approach just presenting things in different ways. I think that's what I really want to do, just have ways to do it. But yeah, again, it requires resources, it requires like manpower, things like that. But it's something that like I feel like everyone who's done this type of stuff have like largely done on pennies, historically speaking. So I guess we gotta still figure it out. If you want to do it, you have to do it. But yeah, I don't know if that makes sense, but hopefully it does.
Totally makes sense. And you should definitely talk to Sina about that, because Sina's been trying to get me to do that for years, and I'm like, I don't have the time for this. But like, you two probably could get into it for sure. Yeah, that's great. Ricky, thanks for coming through.
Lovely,
yeah, Ricky
brilliant.
Was on. Yeah, no,
brilliant organizer,
shout out to Ricky.
Brilliant thinker, by the way.
And I do want to acknowledge what she says here, which is it is the month of action against AFRICOM. I will say this: I signed up the thing already and said we'll do something, and I put on there that we would be happy to host somebody for a conversation. So
Absolutely.
Ricky, tell whoever needs to hear that, so that and it would be great if it's you, but it could be any of your comrades. So shout out to Black Alliance for Peace and all of the work that you all are doing, and yeah, shut down AFRICOM. So thank you. All right. All right, questions, and I'll do the chat questions I caught. Feel free to drop another one if you have it. I did see the one that you just referenced, about not talking about specifics, but are Mac and friendly platforms thinking and talking about contingencies in case these platforms no longer become available? Yeah, we definitely do talk about that. I also make sure to archive everything that we do so that we could take it somewhere else if we needed to. The Yeah, so we think about it, and I think that's something that, you know, is important in terms of what I brought up in terms of resiliency and all of that as well, which is, yeah, we have to plan for it. And yeah, I mean, there's conversations that we have too about other platforms or whether, YouTube is worth whatever. The thing about YouTube is, for better or worse, y'all are on it. And it's integrated into Google in such a fashion that if people search up something, that sometimes Google recommends even our podcast in response to a search that somebody would have, right? In a way that um it RSS feeds, which are what the podcasts come from, do not are not integrated that well because Google doesn't own them, right? And so it's Google's way of trying to sell you more and more ads, is basically the thing that you're like kind of riding on. But um, again, fuck Google. So I don't I'm again always interested in thinking about other things, and I know there are other approaches, like Means TV, has their own app and they work through a different, kind of service to do that. And yeah, I mean, all those things are interesting and I think worth considering. But at the same time, like, there have to be sort of layers of resiliency that you plan in, because even if you create your own app, they could at some point say, like they do with the ice tracking apps right now. Now Google
Mhm.
and
Yeah,
Apple are like conspiring to like take them off of the App Store, right? Because people are using them to stop themselves from being, um, you know, kidnapped by ICE, or in order to go and confront ICE, right? And so I think that's the thing, is that ultimately all of this technology is easily sort of, manipulated by the state in one way or another. And it is actually one of the interesting things about audio and about the RSS feed, is that I'm not saying it's impossible, but they have to do a lot to, like, if you do something on a podcast that Spotify doesn't like, it's like, okay, well, Spotify can take you down, but
mm,
they can't actually get rid of the conversation itself, right? They would
mhm,
have to do something like, I don't even know what that process would fully look like, to
right,
take the ability of somebody to record something and upload it to a RSS feed, because it's basically like the audio version of a blog, right? It's
right,
basically like me saying, "Hey, I'm recording something and I want to put it out to the world." So some of the mechanisms that distribute that can say no. Like one of our episodes with Fred and Stefano, actually, they took down a while ago because it had a sample, and they finally have developed the AI technology to be able
oh
to
wow,
tell
yeah,
that we used the audio song that they were referencing, so they took that one down. But um, they it's very difficult. That conversation could still be listened to on another platform. You know what I mean? And so it doesn't totally erase it. It just means that you can't access it on Spotify. So that's the thing about the audio sphere. But I think video is important for other reasons too. So yeah, thinking about those things is important, is all I'll say. Um,
definitely agree.
all right, so yeah, this was to me talking about my job. What is a good career in a settler colony in capitalism? And I think this is absolutely right. There isn't really one. But also I didn't really have that analysis at the time. And I think that's something to share with other folks too, is that, you know, like, people often, there was a moment where I was like really excited that I was able to quit my job. And then you kind of go, oh shit, like this is now what my income is based on. And it ebbs and flows a little bit every month. And I have to beg people for money every month and all of that. And so I don't necessarily encourage anyone to quit their job. Now, maybe if you work for like Lockheed Martin, like, or Boeing,
Yeah,
I might say, like, could you maybe get in a different line of work? Like, you seem like you probably have some skills that could be useful to something else. But
right,
but you know, I do think that in some form or another, we are all a part of the reproduction of empire, right? Which is sort of to say that, you know, even when we think that we're outside of it because we're doing something different than, you know, we're still a part of it, right? That the ad revenue that people will watch as watching this is funding Google and funding, you know, capitalist corporations more than it is funding us, right? Um, and so, yeah, there's not really an outside of it that you can actually get to. And even if you could, it's just you. So it doesn't change the reality of the situation. Um,
Right.
and so, yeah, I mean, I think that's important to understand. And I think, you know, people should keep their jobs if they can because you need the money and you can hopefully put your resources to other things. But I will say, on a personal level, like doing this project has been super liberating, and not having a job probably helps me feel a little bit freer to express myself in the way
Mhm.
that I want to because I'm not as worried about people coming after my job for what I say.
Mhm.
Um, so yeah, it's all part of it.
Yeah.
The yeah, somebody also asked about free speech plan. Talk about a plan for resisting the free speech expression to come. I mean, it's here, and
Yeah, I don't. I really don't. I get asked this question a lot. I don't think you can like ever really plan for it, other than just like having some level of like grounding with folks who can offer support. And again, a lot of people don't have access to that. Even that, like we've been able to like build relationships with people over the years, both through the pod, but also like the organizing work that I've done, and also through school and different spaces that I've been in. So I've been able to like you know I don't know, but I feel like most people just don't have some level of like grounding with like people in different sides of the world. But it's I really don't know if you can truly plan for it. You really like I really think you just have to be like you just have to like be as like really just as like sharp as possible, and even like just be careful like with the stuff you post online. Like I've even like in some ways like try to be careful with how I tweet or like how I post on Instagram. I don't tweet nearly as much as I used to. Instagram, like I try to be like, again, just trying to be more careful with things, but like and making sure that I'm not just like using just being all because I definitely there was a time where like I would make jokes or like say things that was definitely what I'm saying, definitely got me on a watch list or two. But and I try to just be careful of that as I got older. But again, we're all on that shit, one way or another. Like the way this fucking plant, this technology that they've developed especially with AI, man. Come on, man. It's like this Peter Thiel shit, who's damn near our president at the moment. Honestly, so it's like they have the technology to if they want to get you out of here, they're going to get you out of here. Simply put, I know that sucks to say, and it's like it's bleak as hell, but it's like I just feel like you just have to be as sharp as possible, as careful as possible, and making sure that you have friends and family and people who can like who can support if anything, if and when things come and things get really bad, and they're getting bad already. A lot of people are already experiencing. I know so many people who've been fired, so many people who've been evicted for their organizing work, for even just like expressing support online. Like I know folks who just like have experienced repression, and some of them have gotten their lick back though. Some of them have, what I'm saying, because they've had support, that we pulled together resources to, get their legally get their like, their jobs back, or to get, what I'm saying, get monetary, retaliation for, their being fired unjustly or things like that. But yeah, I think I don't know though if you can plan for it ultimately, other than just at least as an individual. I don't think so. Like I think it has to be like a collective effort ultimately. So but yeah.
you made me think of something I wanted to read real quick, which I got Jemma DeCristo's new book, which is not out yet. I'm excited about it, but it's on blackness and aesthetics. But she had this quote in her acknowledgments that said, like many people publishing in academia, I needed to write this book theoretically to keep my job. Although if we were being honest, this is hardly enough to keep a job in a fascist, Zionist, racist, transphobic, ableist career path in a glorified settler colonial real estate hedge fund known as a university. And I was like, that is a
It's
bar.
incredible. Yeah, it is.
You know, but yeah, I mean, I think that's it's like the both. Like, I mean, I think that the point that you made that's really resonates with me is that probably, I don't want to say the most important, but like a super important element to anti-repression is like the relationships that you
Yeah,
can
absolutely.
build, and like how many people would show up for you and support you and that kind of stuff. And so I do feel good on that level, that I know that there's a lot of people who have even monetarily supported this podcast and us over the years. And there's also people who supported us in all kinds of material ways, but not monetary ways over the years. And, I do know that a lot of people would be on our side in a situation. But I'm also like you, of like, look, they could just kill us. I mean, like, it's not, there is nothing really that ultimately in the end is gonna stop the repression of the speech if they really decide that it needs to be terminated. And unfortunately, we've had the Manhattan Institute has somebody on their payroll right now, which has been targeting guests of ours based on stuff that they say on our podcast, right? So it's like, the repression is here and it is real, and it takes different forms, whether it's YouTube, demonetizing something, or just suppressing us in the algorithm, or whether it's targeting our guests. And if there's ever a campaign to support those folks too, that will be the important thing to show up for as well. But yeah, I mean, for now, like, it's just a reality that we have to kind of deal with. And so other things, so Orisanmi Burton stopped in. Thank you, Ori. To wish us a happy birthday and express profound gratitude. And yeah, appreciate you, Ori. Like, we're all sharper because of you, and I know you know that.
Definitely. Also with Ori, we've been working on another project I was working on. It's I was helping him transcribe and edit some of Deruba's writings, some of his court documents and depositions as well. I read through hundreds of pages of like Deruba's depositions. It is so enlightening, and Ori is finishing up some edits, and he's writing like somewhat of like a semi-biography of Deruba for this book, and hopefully it'll be out in the next year or so. But it is blazing. It's truly, I think, it's somewhat what Deruba reveals about that era. I think it's gonna like really shake shit up here, and how we understand the Black Power or the Panthers, generally going to BLA. Because it's going to be incredible. I think I'm really excited for it to come out. But that's something I also had been involved with over the last year or so. But yeah, and yeah,
Awesome.
or definitely check out. Like, I'm sure that everyone knows, on Tip of the Spear, one of probably my standard for Black radical literature contemporaneously, but one of the great texts out here. But yeah,
it's I went through this process for a while. I emailed you or texted you about this too, and I haven't done anything with it. But like at one point I was like, I kind of wanted to do like a book awards thing, or like a, top 10 books per year or whatever. And all I could say is that Tip of the Spear is like right at the very, very top of all the things that we've done. Partly I wanted to do it because I called Orisanmi Burton an award-winning writer at one point in one of one of my intros for him, and he was like, "Bro, I haven't won any. They were not good." And he considers that a badge of honor too, right? Like he's he sort of, I think, would feel like if he won an award for his book that he didn't do it right, or something like that.
Right.
But I appreciate that mentality too. But I was like, well, we need to give it like a Mac, MacBook Awards. But anyway, all right. So I'm gonna do some shout outs. Before I do that, I do want to say on Monday, we have a bunch of audio stuff coming out soon that you've done. So that'll be coming out
I got
probably in the next week or so.
I have about 15 to 20 that we've recorded. We just need to edit and get them out. And I already have a couple edited. And so they'll be coming out in a couple coming weeks. But yeah.
Josh has figured out how to edit. So look out, folks. Because like now, you know,
we're going to be trying to push them out much more frequently now. But yeah, definitely.
So other folks, the other thing I want to say is that we do have on our end, you know, for the live show, on Monday, we have Imperial 80s. Renee Johnston will be here, and we're going to do Nightmare on Elm Street, as I already referenced. And then Tuesday is the second anniversary of Al-Aqsa flood of the beginning of October 7th, 2023. And I'm really excited that we've got Abdaljawad Omar and Lara Sheehi are going to be in conversation with each other on that date. So it's the first time that the two of them have done something together. And I think that'll be another one of those conversations like, you know, Moten and Hanif, where I just sit aside and just let them talk to each other. Because, you know, what do I have to say to either of them that they can't, you know, have a better conversation between the two of them? So looking forward to both of those, of course. And then I have a conversation I recorded with Darren from the study group that people may know Darren, where we really it's the most biblical oriented discussion we've ever had on millennials, for sure, because it's me sitting with a minister and talking about the Old Testament and talking about you know, how that then embeds into Zionism and all that. And it's a good discussion. It's really one I enjoyed having with him. All right, so 8 years. So first, and feel free, Josh, after I do this, to fill in any gaps or any people that you want to shout out as well, because I know you have folks too. But first, I want to thank my family. Like, you know, I don't say this enough, but my children put up with me being, you know, a quasi sociopath for reading and studying and doing stuff related to this podcast. And, you know, I hope that when they're older that they one, appreciate what I've done, but also don't hate me as a father as a result, because I love both of them immensely. And you know, they teach me a lot. And then of course my wife, who literally that's the other part is, yeah, you can't quit your job without somebody else in your life also that is able to help out and, you know, have health insurance and things like that. So huge shout out to her, and also just being a person who's been on intellectual, spiritual, political journey with me since we've met, you know. And so, you know, tremendous gratitude to them, to my parents as well. So I want to thank all them. And then more directly related to just the production of the show, again, Televangel for the music. I did add his Bandcamp to the show description. I don't do that enough. And I apologize, Ian, for not not being very good on my end of the bargain, which is like, you give us free music for the podcast and the least I could do is shout you out. And, you know, anyways, I appreciate all that you have done for us. And I appreciate the music that you've provided. Aidan Elias for producing a number of episodes at this point. I don't know how many, maybe 25, 30, somewhere in that range, I would guess. But a lot of the episodes that Josh has done, particularly over the last 2 years since I shifted to mainly video, which took up time that I couldn't dedicate to audio production, which I did before that. Then I do want to shout out, folks. These are people who have given over $1,000 to the podcast over the last 8 years. And there may be some others that I don't know because you give across multiple platforms, and I looked mainly at Patreon. But Eric, Fred, David, Alex, Shannon, Sarah, Nico, Tyler, Sam, Gay, Lauren, Peter, Random, Katie, Alex, Diane, Noah, Laurel, Joseph, Mark, MCL, another Mark, Emmanuel, Sophia, another Mark, Zero, and Hope. So there's a few people who are close to that as well, but I just had to pick some cutoff, and that one left me a good number of people to pick, but not me going into, um, you know, hundreds or thousands of people who have contributed in some way, which is amazing. Thank you to them, but to everybody who's, given, because I don't know if people know this, but the ad revenue portion, which is technically a small portion of our revenue at this point, at the highest, it could be $400 a month right now based off of things. And so, like, obviously that's, it might help me pay my electric bill. But that's it, so the show is made possible through our patrons for sure. And there's no, as you always say, there's no grant funding. There's nothing like that for us. Episodes, guests that have brought us more than 10,000 views or downloads from a single conversation. And so again, this is a shortened list because you pick some arbitrary point, but I wanted to thank all of these folks because that's 10,000 views or downloads for us in an individual show is a lot. We rarely do that. We've only done it 4 times on YouTube. And we've done it more times than that on the audio side. But, Fred Moten, Joy James, Stefano Harney, Vijay Prashad, Hanif Abdurraqib, Ruthie Wilson Gilmore, Abdaljawad Omar, Andrew J. Douglas, Jared Loggins, Hiram Rivera, Orisanmi Burton, Robbie McVeigh, Bill Rolston, Lara Sheehi, Stephen Sheehi, Olafemi Taiwo, Sadia Hartman, Kali Akuno, Kamal Franklin, Ali Kadri, Jesse Benjamin, Francis Hasso, Sina Rahmani, Deshaun Harrison, Joshua Myers, Sophia G. and Nathan Y., Ronaldo Walcott, Allison Escalante, Jay Mufwad Paul, Devin Zane Shaw, Kareem, Wendy Carino, Stephen Osuna, and Daruba Ben Wahad. That is the list for that. And yeah, I mean, the other thing I would say is like that list is reflective, I think, of one of the things I appreciate about this podcast, which is some of those people obviously are big names. There are people who have a lot of people who check out for them and listen to them and are interested in what they have to say and will just go to something that has them in it. Which has certainly been a part of how we have grown the platform to what it is. And I appreciate all those people for showing up that are in that camp. The other thing is that there's some people that are not big names in there, right? And so that part is interesting too, because some of it is about just there are certain conversations that we have that really resonate for one reason or another with our audience, right? Which is another group of people to really thank, is everybody who listens and watches. But sometimes it's the timeliness of the intervention, right? You're talking about something at a time when people are really thinking about it and they're seeking something out because everything that they're seeing is like propaganda or nonsense or whatever, and they look forward to listening to or watching something from us in that time frame. And sometimes it's just that like somebody just comes through with like a uniquely brilliant perspective, and it may not be something that's super timely, but it just that really resonates with people for some reason. And so yeah, wanted to acknowledge all of those people and to thank every guest that we've ever had. I mean, this show is a
Absolutely.
very guest driven platform. Like we are just 2 guys at the end of the day. And we have some interesting things to say, hopefully, but yeah, the people that we have had on have been the thing that has been the engine, I would say, of this
Absolutely.
show
Yeah.
for sure. You know.
Yeah, totally agree with that. Actually, I want to shout out one episode that I've been thinking about recently because of Asada's passing, but Sekou Odinga's episode that we recorded years ago. And I was talking about this with friends recently about like how I remember how like I don't know if it made it in the edit. I mean, it made it in the final edit of the. I have to go re-listen to it. I really hate listening to my voice. I never listen to the episodes that I'm on, honestly. But like, I remember like he was coughing throughout the entirety of the recording, and it was like really tough to hear because he had just gotten out of prison. He's had been in there for what 35 years or something like that. I think it was something along those lines. And he was very, very clearly suffering and sick, and he died not too long after that. But I'm thinking about him obviously because his role in the liberation of Asada, ultimately. So, and I think people, if you out there thinking about Asada and or revisiting, her autobiography, you should definitely go check out that episode. Yeah, it's one of my favorite conversations we've had, though.
Yeah, no, I feel so honored that Baba
Absolutely.
Sekou Odinga, said yes when we asked him, and
Yes.
that's another group of people that actually is, other than Daruba, who was on that list.
Yeah.
It's one of the things that frustrates me sometimes, and maybe did Ray Luke Lavassier make it? I don't think he did. I think he's close, but yeah, I get frustrated sometimes that people don't want to listen to those conversations with elders as much,
Yeah.
and I do understand in relation to that one because you're right, the audio quality on that is not good. Unfortunately, because he was ill at the time. But yeah, I mean, that's such an amazing thing that we've had that opportunity to talk to those folks.
Absolutely.
And I hope to continue to do discussions like that as much as we can. But I really want people to also think about why it is, and I'm not saying this to point a finger at folks. I'm saying it that we all need to reflect on this. Like, why is it that, and I can say this empirically, right, with data, that we are less likely to listen to an episode from a prisoner. We are less likely to listen to an episode from a political prisoner. We're less likely to listen to an episode from a movement veteran who has lessons and incredible knowledge that they're trying to transmit, than we are to listen to a high profile academic. And that's something about our social conditioning that even those of us on the left, we have to grapple with it, right? And it's always been a contradiction. You and I have talked about it before, that we've tried to figure out how do we do this, because because it's like, if on one end, if we just went hard and said, hey, we're only going to interview organizers and veterans of movements, right, then the reality is like a smaller group of people would listen to us too, or watch us too, because we fall into that category of everybody's not that, these are all people that people are ignoring or not listening to. So for us, I've always tried to like figure out that balance of say, okay, I'm going to give you this every once in a while. I'm going to bring in this person that I know a lot of you want to hear from, but I also want you to show up, right, when we bring in Baba Sekou Odinga or Laura Whitehorn or Ray Luke Lavassier or like all these people, and or Jalil Muntakim, so yeah, I just encourage people to think about that and to just be conscious of your own behavior around that, because a lot of us who even are on the left, and even I include myself in this, there's a thing that you will notice of like somebody puts out something with an elder or a political prisoner or something, and you're less likely to click on that conversation, right? And like that's something that's been done to us, right, that we've internalized, that now we're playing out in terms of our behavior. And so we should productively try to challenge that within ourselves.
Definitely.
But yeah, thank you for shouting out Sekou Odinga. The other thing I wanted to say is I got to meet him about probably 6 months or so before he passed away, and I did go up to him and introduce myself and thank him for coming on the show. And he smiled. He has a great smile, and he remembered, and he thanked me, and that was cool. So like that, sometimes a lot of people that we've talked I never get to meet, but I did get to meet him before he passed away. So all right. Another question. Do we back up the YouTube videos? We do. So that's yes, absolutely. I think that's about it. I do want to thank also, and there's somebody that, like when my laptop got nuked a couple of years ago, like a bunch of people raised money to buy me a new laptop too. And I forgot to go back and look at all the names of the people who did that. I wanted to do that, but I just, even though I'm not naming you all, I really want to thank people for showing up in that way, because we were down for like a month because of that. And other than the great flooding of my basement last year, that was like the greatest hit to our productivity. So shout out to those folks. And then another layer of folks I just want to thank is like everybody who's participated in the study groups that we have done, and the Discord also. Like shout out to all the people in the Discord. But the thing with the study groups is just that we've done a lot, and I've been able to build a lot of relationships with people through that are closer, and I just thank all the folks for doing that. I don't know why I can't find the list, but maybe I can find it in the Discord. I'm not going to try to look it up, but we've been doing study groups. I did some that actually preceded Mac, but we're on Ali Kadri right now, and I think we've done about 10, maybe a little bit more than that since the podcast started. And we usually, at least over, especially a post 2020, we always do more than one per year, usually 2 or 3. So yeah, that's great. It's a great space. It's not it's not going to be the site of the revolution, but it's a great space for all of us coming together and learning together, and collective politicization, people connecting, people being able to find like-minded folks, join organizations, deepen their own knowledge, and so that's very meaningful. And there's a lot of people, too many to shout out, that have been a part of it. A number of them are in the chat right now, and just want to thank everybody that's participated in that. And people have been, I should say, there's labor that goes into that. People, you have to join a study group, you have to take notes, you have to facilitate conversations. And so I also appreciate all the people who have put labor into that work beyond just reading and talking, which is also some form of labor as well. So yeah, I mean, that's it for shout outs, but I did want to do that because there's a lot of folks that are involved in this project directly and behind the scenes, often in ways, and a lot of them I've built strong relationships through this project. And I just want to thank all of them as well, and yeah, as well as Ian at Televangel, and Aidan, who I don't shout out enough either.
Yeah. Wait, before we go, though, I want to say it's been an honor to work with you these years. And honestly, I cannot stress enough just how much you've carried us these last couple of years with me, venturing out and doing so many other things. And you being patient and again, just fucking killing it. And again, I hear people I know people, I've met people at school and random ass places who will mention Mac. And just some of them don't even know it was I'm a part of it, just because I don't really mention it much for one. I mean, I do a good enough job at promoting it as well on my end. But it's gotten better over the years. I would say that. But I would say that people mention the study groups and some certain episodes that you or I have done and stuff like that. And it's it's very even if you didn't burn on the episode, you edited, you gave it the final before it went out. You you like kind of like go over it and offer me your thoughts and things like that. And yeah, I just appreciate it. It's honestly, truly, it's been a blast, and I hope we go for another 8 years. Honestly, I think we're gonna continue on, in our, get better at this, as we go on. And so, it really is. It feels weird. I'm about to be 30 here soon. It feels weird. I was like, what, 20, 21, I think when we started, 21, 22, 22, maybe, I don't know. And just, it feels like a totally different person, totally different reality. And yeah, I wanted to do this with anyone else. And it's honestly, I thank you for, approaching me about this for the first time in 2017. Yeah, 2017. Approaching about it like it was so like I had never really like thought about it. What I'm saying? And we really brought it to life, and did something really cool with it. I'm surprised all the time the amount of people that I come across who like truly have made like friends and gotten into relationships, over bonding over our pod. Like it's insane to think about the amount of people that actually listen, considering where we started. It was very primitive how we got started for sure. And so and the fact that so many people it resonates with so many people is really awesome to see. And I hope we continue to develop it and refine and maintain a permanence, I guess, amongst people. But
Yeah, no, I appreciate you saying that, Josh, and back at you. It's been great to be a part of this project with you for 8 years, and I very much appreciate you as a partner, and it's been cool for me. It's kind of it's a different thing, but to watch you go into now doing stuff all yourself, and I mean, there's like there's ways that one could look at that, saying, oh, they're not doing as much together, or whatever. But I think that it's been, I mean, like I don't think I finished the story fully, but we didn't know each other in the beginning really, except through Twitter. And I didn't, part of the joke is like I didn't know you were an undergrad student either, right? And so like when we started, because of the way that you tweeted and talked about things online, and you've always been intellectually advanced for your age, my man. And I just assumed you were at least a grad student, right? And had I knew you were. I didn't know you were in school, but I just assumed you were like a PhD student or something like that. And like no, and you so it's been cool in some ways. I mean, we've both grown up a lot over the last 8 years, in many ways. But yeah, I mean, I was 35, when we started it, and you were like, 20, 21, something like that, So it's been cool watching you grow up and to see the stuff that you're doing, and I can't wait to read your book. And
I appreciate it.
And I appreciate a lot of people have been shouting out, particularly the conversation you had with Iker the other day, Iker Suarez. And yeah, you're doing great work there as well. And so anyways, I look forward to figuring out more ways that we can run this partnership and collaborate.
We definitely will, and we're gonna be better with it, especially when I'm done with this. When I finally turn that final manuscript in, I'm gonna feel much more relief and much more time and energies. So I'll definitely be joining you more. But we'll see. I'm looking forward to it for sure.
For sure. All right. Well, I think on that note, I will take us out of here. This has been great. Appreciate the chat.
Thank you everyone for tuning in.
Yeah, thank you for tuning in. All right.